Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto is reborn in One Piece and becomes king of Wano with Yamato and Hiyori? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Fox in the Land of Samurai. The rain that fell on Curry wasn't water. It was a thin, greasy cocktail of poison and sorrow that slicked the dead earth and clung to the skin like a shroud. It tasted of rust and defeat. This was the first thing Naruto Uzumaki learned about his new life. The second was that the air was just as bad, a thick soup of industrial smoke and misery that scraped the lungs with every breath. He sat up, the mud of a riverbank squelching beneath his hands, and the memories came not as a gentle stream but as a tidal wave. The Fourth Great Ninja War. Kagaya. The final, Earth's hattering clash with Sasuke in the Valley of the End. The long, arduous years of rebuilding, of fostering peace, of becoming the seventh Hokage, a dream realized. He remembered the weight of the hat on his head, the pride in his heart. The faces of his children, Boruto and Himawari, the gentle smile of his wife, Hinata. He remembered a life lived, a purpose fulfilled. And then, a void. A quiet, painless fade to black. He'd died an old man, content and at peace, surrounded by those he loved. He looked at his hands now. They were not the wrinkled, scarred hands of a cage who had seen a lifetime of conflict and paperwork. They were young, strong, radiating a potent energy that felt both familiar and alien. Chakra, yes, but intertwined with something else. A raw, untamed life force that permeated everything in this world. He could feel it in the dying trees, in the poisoned river, and in the distant, flickering spirits of starving people. He closed his eyes, extending his senses, a skill honed over a lifetime. The sensation was overwhelming. It was like trying to listen to a whisper in a hurricane. This world screamed with this power, this, Haki, as the ambient consciousness seemed to name it. His own energy was a roaring bonfire in the oppressive gloom. Kurama was gone, truly gone, his sacrifice an old, deep ache in his soul. But his essence, a faint, warm echo, remained woven into Naruto's own chakra. A permanent part of him. He was alone, but not entirely. He stood, his simple, unfamiliar clothes, rough spun trousers and a loose-fitting tunic, doing little to ward off the chill. He was in a land that felt sick, a nation on its knees. And Naruto Uzumaki, for the second time in his existence, was a stranger in a strange land. He walked for what felt like days, following the sluggish, rainbow-sheened river upstream. The landscape was a testament to systematic cruelty. The trees were skeletal claws reaching for a sky perpetually shrouded in black smoke belched from colossal factories that scarred the horizon. The ground was barren. The villages he passed were little more than collections of hovels where people with hollow eyes and gaunt faces stared at him with a mixture of fear and utter apathy. They were ghosts haunting their own homes, their life forces flickering like guttering candles. He learned the lay of the land through whispers caught on the wind and the palpable despair that clung to every settlement. This was Wano, a land of samurai, now a poisoned prison. It was ruled by a tyrant named Kaido and his puppet, the shogun Orochi. They were the source of the rot, the ones who had chained this nation and were slowly bleeding it dry. The names meant nothing to him, but the story was as old as time itself. Power, corruption, and the suffering of the innocent. It was a tune he knew all too well. In a village nestled in the shadow of a slag heap, he saw it unfold. A handful of Kaido's men, the beast pirates, swaggered through the muddy street. They were large, boorish men, armed with crude swords and draped in shabby animal pelts. They moved with the unearned confidence of bullies, their laughter a harsh, grating sound in the suffocating quiet. They kicked over a vendor's empty stall, sending rotten vegetables scattering into the mud, before cornering a family huddled outside their shack, a mother, a father, and a small, whimpering child. Still holding out on us, are ya? The lead pirate sneered, his teeth yellowed and crooked. He grabbed a small, dirty sack from the father's hands. What's this? A couple of rice balls. You know the deal. Food is a tribute to the glory of Kaido. The father, a man so thin his bones seemed ready to pierce his skin, reached out a trembling hand. Please, he begged, his voice a dry rasp. My son. He hasn't eaten in 2 days. The pirate laughed, a guttural, ugly sound. He tossed the sack to one of his men. Should have worked harder in the mines, then. Your kid's hunger is your failure, not my problem. He drew his sword, its edge chipped and stained. Now, unless you want to give us a tribute of blood, I suggest you get back in your hole. The mother pulled her child close, her body shaking with silent sobs. The father fell to his knees, his head bowed in utter subjugation. The other villagers watched, their faces masks of stony resignation. This was their life. This was the unchangeable, unending reality of Wano under Kaido. Naruto had seen enough. He didn't announce his presence. He didn't make a grand speech. He simply moved. One moment he was 30 yards away, a stranger in the rain-slicked mud. The next, he was there. The world seemed to slow, the poisoned raindrops hanging in the air. The lead pirate's eyes widened, his brain failing to process the sudden appearance of the blonde-haired man. He only had time for a single, stupid thought. Where did he come from? Naruto's hand was an open palm against the pirate's chest. There was no visible force, no grand display of power. Just a quiet, focused pulse of haki-infused chakra. The pirate's eyes rolled back in his head as his armor crumpled inward. He flew backward, not with a shout, but with a silent, breathless arc, crass. Hing through the wall of a nearby hovel with a splintering crunch of rotting wood. He didn't get up. The other 2 pirates stared, their jaws slack. Their companion hadn't just been punched. He'd been turned off. Who the hell are you? One of them stammered, fumbling to draw his weapon. Naruto turned his gaze on him. It was a calm, steady look, but it held the weight of 1,000 battles and the authority of a leader who had commanded nations. It was the gaze of the 7th Hokage. The pirate froze, his hand trembling on the hilt of his sword. He felt a pressure in the air, a suffocating essence that made his knees weak and his lungs burn. It was a conqueror's will, raw and absolute, washing over him. He had felt something similar once, standing in the shadow of Kaido himself, but this was different. It wasn't just brutal, it was ancient, unshakable, and utterly certain. Give them back their food, Naruto said. His voice was even, without malice, but it carried the finality of a death sentence. The pirate holding the sack of rice balls dropped it as if it were on fire. He and his remaining comrades scrambled backward, tripping over their own feet in their haste to get away. They half-carried, half-dragged their unconscious leader with them, disappearing into the gloom, their panicked footsteps swallowed by the mud. Silence descended upon the village once more, but it was a different kind of silence. It was laced with a fragile, unfamiliar thing, shock. The father stared at Naruto, his eyes wide with disbelief. Naruto simply bent down, picked up the small sack from the mud, and handed it to him. It's not much, Naruto said, his voice softer now. But it's yours. The man took the sack, his fingers brushing against Naruto's. He flinched, then looked up, truly seeing the stranger for the first time. The bright yellow hair, the whisker marks on his cheeks, and the piercing blue eyes that held no judgment, only a deep, weary understanding. He bowed his head, tears finally tracing paths through the grime on his face. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you. Naruto gave a slight nod and turned to walk away. He had not come here to be a hero. He was simply tired of watching people suffer. As he reached the edge of the village, he paused. His senses, now more attuned to the energies of this world, picked up a flicker of life hiding in the shadows of a ruined watchtower. It was a disciplined presence. The energy controlled, banked like the embers of a dying fire. A warrior, a spy, whoever it was had seen everything. Naruto gave a noncommittal glance in the T.O.'s direction before continuing on his path, leaving the villagers to whisper his description into the nascent legends of a broken land. From the crumbling tower, Kinemon watched the stranger disappear. He clutched the hilt of his katana, his heart pounding a rhythm of fear and hope. He had seen power in his lifetime. He had seen the monstrous strength of Kaido and the godlike presence of Kazuki Oden. This man was neither. He was something else entirely. That brief, silent display of will, it had made him, a seasoned samurai of the Akazaya Nine, want to kneel. He had to report this. Lord Yasui had to know. A new piece was on the board. Naruto's journey took him toward the only source of vibrant, flourishing life he could sense in this entire region. It was a stark contrast to the death that permeated the rest of the land. A beacon of defiant energy that called to him. It led him, eventually, to the flower capital. The transition was jarring. One moment he was walking through deforested wastelands. The next he was on a clean, paved road leading to a city bustling with life. Here, the air was clean, the trees were lush and green, and the buildings were elegant structures of wood and paper. Cheerful music drifted from open windows, and the streets were filled with people in colorful kimonos, their faces happy and well-fed. It was an island of prosperity in an ocean of despair. But it was a false paradise. Naruto could feel the truth of it. Beneath the laughter and the music, there was a current of fear. The prosperity was a lie, a thin veneer painted over the rot that consumed the rest of the country. This city was a parasite, thriving on the stolen lifeblood of Wano, and its people were either complicit or blissfully ignorant. The guards at the gate, samurai in the service of the shogun, were fat and complacent, their eyes holding a casual cruelty. Naruto slipped past them with the ease of a shadow, his presence unnoticed, his energy shielded. He was a ghost in the machine. He moved through the crowded streets, an observer. He saw the opulence, the merchants hawking their wares, the nobles laughing in their palanquins. He saw the stark difference between smiling citizens of the capital and the hollow-eyed wretches of Kuri, and a cold anger began to smolder within him. This wasn't peace. It was oppression with a prettier face. His attention was drawn to a commotion at the heart of the city. A crowd had gathered, their faces turned upward in adoration toward a procession moving down the main street. It was a parade of breathtaking beauty and grace. At its center, walking on impossibly high Geta sandals, was Anwaran, a courtesan of the highest rank. She was a vision, her kimono a masterpiece of silk and gold thread, her hair an intricate work of art adorned with ornate pins. Her face, painted a pristine white, was a mask of serene, untouchable beauty. The crowd chanted her name, Komurasaki. Komurasaki. Naruto watched, unimpressed by the pageantry. He had seen princesses and empresses. But then, as the procession drew closer, he felt it. Beneath the layers of silk, beneath the painted mask, he sensed a will of tempered steel. He felt a life force burning with a quiet, incandescent grief, an emotional storm held in check by a discipline that was almost absolute. This woman was more than she appeared. She was a prisoner in a golden cage. And she was a warrior in her own right. As she passed, her gaze swept over the crowd. For a fleeting second, her eyes, a deep, intelligent brown, met his. The practiced, serene smile on her lips did not waver. But he saw a flicker in their depths. A spark of surprise. Most people looked at her with awe, reverence, or lust. He looked at her and saw the truth. He saw the sorrow, the strength, the burning core of defiance she kept hidden from the world. Hiyori, known to the world as Komurasaki, felt the stranger's gaze like a physical touch. It wasn't the lecherous stare of the shogun or the adoring gaze of the masses. It was a look of recognition. It was as if this man, with his impossible sun-colored hair and eyes as blue as the open sea, could see past the Warren and into the soul of the lost princess of Wano. He radiated a power she had never encountered before, an aura that was not born of this land. It was vast, ancient, and strangely comforting, like the warmth of a sun she had long forgotten. Who was he? The question lingered in her mind long after the procession had moved on, a single, intriguing mystery in her carefully controlled world of deception and survival. That night, Naruto found a quiet rooftop overlooking the shogun's palace, a gaudy, ostentatious structure that was a blight on the city's architecture. He sat in the lotus position, the cool night air washing over him as he meditated. Sifting through the torrent of information this new world presented, he was a leaf adrift on a vast, unknown ocean. But he had a compass. His core principles, the things that had defined him as a man and as a Hokage, were unchanged. He would not stand by while the innocent suffered. He would not tolerate tyranny. He had no grand plan. He didn't know the players, the politics, or the true depths of the darkness that had consumed this land. But he knew where to start. He would find the heart of the rot and cut it out. Kaido, Orochi. The names were now targets. His purpose here was not yet clear. But the first step was, he would bring the dawn to this land of endless night. From a much higher, more distant rooftop, a figure in a pristine white suit lowered a den mushi. His face was hidden behind a blank, white mask, the symbol of cipher Poligus 0. Report. A cold, metallic voice rasped from the snail. The acid in curry was neutralized, the agent said, his voice a monotone whisper. But an anomaly has appeared. Unidentified individual. Exhibited a significant power level, including a confirmed use of Haoshoku Haki to intimidate the pirates. He's now in the flower capital. His energy signature is unlike anything on record. It's old. There was a pause on the other end. The sound of quiet, contemplative breathing. Observe him, the voice commanded. Do not engage. Wano is a delicate ecosystem. We cannot afford another unknown variable interfering with the balance. Especially not now. The elders have taken an interest. Understood, the CP0 agent replied. The Den Mushi went silent. The agent remained, a silent, white sentinel under the pale moon, his masked gaze fixed on the city below. The world was watching, and in the heart of the capital, a slumbering fox had just begun to stir. The storm that was coming for Wano had a new, unpredictable epicenter. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Oni Princess and the Sage's Vow. The flower capital at night was a different beast. The cheerful facade of the day gave way to a world of paper lanterns and shadows, of sake-fueled laughter and whispered secrets. It was a city that exhaled its true nature under the cloak of darkness. For Naruto, it was a familiar hunting ground. He moved across the rooftops with a silence that was second nature, his presence a ghost in the periphery. He wasn't looking for a fight. He was looking for an introduction. Reaching a figure like the Warren Komurasaki was a challenge akin to infiltrating a daimyo's fortress. She was constantly surrounded by attendants, guards, and wealthy patrons who paid small fortunes for a few moments of her time. A direct approach was impossible. But Naruto Uzumaki had never been one for direct approaches when a cleverer path was available. He had spent the day gathering information, not with threats or interrogations, but by listening. He'd used a dozen subtle transformation jutsus, becoming a forgettable face in a tea house. A delivery boy in the entertainment district, a laborer near the Warrens' residence. He learned her schedule, the rotation of her guards, and the layout of her quarters. It was rudimentary shinobi work, but effective. He found his opening. A small, secluded garden at the back of her residence, shielded from prying eyes by a high wall and a dense thicket of bamboo. According to the whispers he'd overheard, it was her private sanctuary, the one place she went to be truly alone. He slipped over the wall, landing as softly as a falling leaf, and waited. He didn't have to wait long. A shoji door slid open, and she emerged. A silhouette against the warm light from within. She had shed the impossibly complex layers of the Warren. Now, she wore a simple, elegant yukata of deep indigo, her hair unbound and cascading down her back like a river of dark silk. The stark white paint was gone, revealing a face of natural, breathtaking beauty, but one etched with a profound and weary sadness. This was not Komurasaki, the idol of the capital. This was Hiyori Kazuki, the ghost of a fallen dynasty. She walked to a small stone lantern at the edge of a koi pond, her movements graceful and deliberate. She didn't seem to notice him. But Naruto knew better. Her senses were sharp, her posture too controlled. She knew she was not alone. The guards in the capital are either lazy or corrupt, Naruto said, his voice calm and low. Not wanting to startle her but making no further effort to hide his presence. He stepped out from the shadow of a gnarled pine tree. It wasn't hard to get in. You should have better protection. Hiyori turned, her expression unreadable. There was no fear in her eyes, only a guarded curiosity. She recognized him instantly from the crowd. The sun-haired man with the impossibly blue eyes. Protection from what? She asked, her voice a soft melody with an undercurrent of steel. Drunken admirers. Desperate merchants. The shogun already owns my cage. No one else would dare try to claim it. I'm not here to claim anything, Naruto replied, taking a step closer, his hands held open in a gesture of peace. I saw you today, in the procession. I saw past the mask. A flicker of something, annoyance, perhaps, or surprise, crossed her features. Many men claim to see my soul. It is usually a prelude to a clumsy attempt at seduction, followed by a request for a loan. Naruto offered a small, wry smile. I don't want your money. And I'm not trying to seduce you. I want to know why a woman with the spirit of a master swordswoman and the grief of a fallen queen is playing the part of a courtesan. The air grew cold. Her eyes narrowed, the guarded curiosity sharpening into suspicion. You speak with dangerous poetry, stranger. Words like that can get a man killed in this city. Who are you? My name is Naruto Uzumaki. He saw no reason to lie. And I'm the one who dealt with Kaido's thugs in Curry. Hiyori's composure finally cracked. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly. She had heard the whispers, of course. A mysterious blonde man with monstrous power appearing from nowhere, dispatching a group of beast pirates without drawing a weapon. She had assumed it was an exaggeration. A desperate rumor born of a starving populace's wishful thinking. But here he was. So the rumors are true, she breathed. Why reveal yourself to me? You could have remained a ghost. Ghosts don't win wars, Naruto stated plainly. I can feel the sickness in this country. I felt it in Curry, and I feel it here, under all this perfume and music. It's the same rot, just dressed in finer clothes. You feel it too. You live with it every day. I want to know everything. The name of the disease, and who holds the cure. Hiyori studied him for a long, silent moment. Her entire life since her parents' murder had been a masterclass in deception and survival. She trusted no one. Her brother, Momonosuke, was her only hope, sent 20 years into the future, and the Akazaya 9 were scattered. She was alone, playing a long, dangerous game, using her beauty as both a shield and a weapon. But this man, he was different. He didn't look at her with desire, but with a strange, unsettling empathy. As if he understood the burden she carried. His power was undeniable, a palpable aura of strength and conviction that seemed to press in on the very air around them. It was a wild, untamed energy. Yet it felt fundamentally good. Like the warmth of the sun after a long winter. Why should I trust you? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. You are an outsider. For all I know, you could be a new player sent by one of Kaido's rivals, or even the world government. You shouldn't trust me, Naruto admitted freely. Trust is earned. But you can trust what I'm going to do. I'm going to take Kaido's head. I'm going to tear down the shogun who sits in that ugly palace. I'm going to give this country back to its people. That's my path. You can either point me in the right direction or you can watch me stumble through the dark. Either way, I'm moving forward. His declaration was so simple, so utterly devoid of arrogance or bravado, that it stunned her. He spoke of Ki Ling, an emperor of the sea, as if he were talking about weeding a garden. It was the talk of a madman, or someone with the power to back it up. Looking into his eyes, Hiyori found it hard to believe he was mad. She made a decision, a dangerous, desperate leap of faith. The disease is twofold, she began, her voice low and urgent. The shogun, Kurozumi Orochi, is a wretched, paranoid snake who betrayed my father. The great daimyo Kazuki Oden. He is the cancer within. Kaido and his beast pirates are the plague from without. They provide Orochi with the brute force to maintain his rule, and in return, Orochi allows them to turn Wano into their personal weapons factory, poisoning our land and enslaving our people. She spoke for what felt like an hour, the words pouring out of her as if a dam had broken. She told him of her father's legendary life and tragic, heroic death. She told him of her mother's sacrifice, of the Akazaya 9, the loyal retainers sworn to her family, and of her brother, Momonosuke, who was prophesied to return and lead the rebellion. She poured out 20 years of pain, grief, and simmering rage. Naruto listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes or empty promises. He simply stood there and absorbed her story, his blue eyes never leaving hers, offering a silent, unwavering attention that was more comforting than any words could have been. When she finished, her breath catching in a half-sob she refused to let fall, he finally spoke. Kazuki Oden, he said, testing the name. He sounded like a great man. He was the greatest, Hiyori affirmed, a fierce pride cutting through her sorrow. Then his dream for this country is worth fighting for, Naruto said. It wasn't a question, it was a conclusion. You've been very strong, Hiyori Haim. He used her title, the name she hadn't heard spoken with sincerity in 2 decades. The sound of it, from this stranger, made her tremble. Just Hiyori, she corrected, her voice thick with emotion. Hiyori, he agreed with a nod. I need to find your retainers, the Akazaya 9. I need to find the heart of the rebellion. We need to unite them. It won't be easy, she warned. They are scattered, hiding. Orochi's spies are everywhere. Spies are my specialty, Naruto said with a confidence that was absolute. He formed a single hand sign. With a soft puff of smoke, a perfect duplicate of himself stood beside him. Hiyori gasped, stumbling back a step. The clone gave her a cheerful wave. I can be in 100 places at once, gathering information, passing messages. Orochi's spies will be chasing their own tails. He dispelled the clone with another puff of smoke. Tell me where to start. Hiyori's mind raced. This power, it was unlike any devil fruit she had ever heard of. It was something else entirely. For the first time in a long time, the suffocating despair that had been her constant companion began to recede, replaced by a tiny, fragile spark of hope. There is a man, she said, her voice firming with new resolve. Yasui, the former daimyo of Hakumai. He lives in Ebisu town, on the outskirts of the capital. He is a friend to my family. He will know where to find the others. But you must be careful. I always am, Naruto said. He turned to leave. One more thing. Your cage is about to get rattled. When the fighting starts, the capital will be the most dangerous place in Wano. Be ready. Before she could reply, he was gone, melting back into the shadows as if he were never there. Hiyori stood alone in her garden, the scent of pine and the cool night air feeling sharper, clearer than before. The world had just changed. The pieces on the board had been thrown into the air, and a wild, unpredictable whirlwind named Naruto Uzumaki was now at the center of the storm. On the skull-shaped island of Onigashima, the mood was, as always, one of brutal revelry. Beast pirates drank, fought, and bellowed, their laughter echoing through the cavernous halls of Kaido's fortress. But in a secluded chamber, Yamato was not laughing. They sat cross-legged on the floor, the worn, leather-bound journal of Kazuki Oden open in their lap. A man arrived on the shores of Wano, a man not of this land, Yamato read aloud. Their voice filled with reverence. Oden's words painted a picture of his first meeting with Whitebeard, of the world beyond Wano's closed borders, a world of freedom and adventure. For Yamato, this journal was not just a book. It was scripture. It was a window into a life they desperately wanted to emulate, the life of a true hero. Their father, Kaido, despised it. He called Oden a fool, a weakling who had traded his strength for silly dreams. He had tried to burn the journal, but Yamato had protected it, earning a brutal beating for their defiance. The explosive manacles locked around their wrists were a constant, painful reminder of their gilded imprisonment. A commotion outside their door broke their concentration. Two low-level pirates, their faces flushed with sake, stumbled past. Their voices loud and slurred. Swear it's true. Took out Kageyama's whole squad in curry. They said he just looked at him, and they couldn't move. Nah, you're drunker than usual. No one's that tough. Not without a name, anyway. They're calling him the Kitsune of Curry, the fox. Said he had yellow hair like a fox's tail and weird marks on his cheeks. Just appeared out of thin air, they said. And then vanished. Freaky stuff. Yamato's head snapped up. Yellow hair. Appeared out of thin air. Overwhelming power. It sounded like a story from Oden's journal. A tale of a legendary figure arriving to change the course of history. A new player. An unknown factor. A chance. A fierce grin spread across Yamato's face. This was it. This was the sign they had been waiting for. Oden wouldn't have sat around waiting for freedom to be handed to him. He would have charged out and seized it. And so would they. Their decision made, they stood, strapping the journal securely to their back. Their weapon, a massive, spiked kanabo club named Takaru, leaned against the wall. They hefted it, the familiar weight a comforting presence in their hands. Freedom was waiting. The guards at their door were an elite pair, both headliners with minor zone-type devil fruits. They straightened up as Yamato slid the door open. Young master, one of them grunted. You're not supposed to leave your quarters without an escort. I'm tired of my quarters, Yamato declared, their voice ringing with a newfound excitement. And I'm tired of escorts. I'm going for a walk. Lord Kaido's orders are absolute. The other guard insisted, stepping forward to block their path. You are to remain here. Yamato sighed, a theatrical sound of exasperation. You know, Odin would have respected your loyalty, they said. A cheerful smile on their face. But he also would have found you very, very annoying. Before the guards could react, Yamato moved. They were a blur of white and blue, their Kanabo a speeding comet. The first guard brought up his arms to block, his skin hardening into a stony carapace. The Kanabo struck with a sound like a thunderclap, and the guard's defense shattered. He was sent flying down the corridor, crashing into a wall with enough force to splinter the stone. The second guard transformed, becoming a hulking boar man, and charged, tusks gleaming. Yamato met the charge head-on. Reime Hake, they roared, swinging their club in a devastating, hockey-infused arc. The impact was cataclysmic. The boar man was swatted out of the air like an insect, his transformation failing as he sailed out of a nearby window and into the stormy seas below. Alarms began to blare. Yamato paid them no mind. They sprinted through the fortress, their laughter echoing behind them. This was living. This was the thrill of rebellion, the taste of defiance. They were not Kaido's child. They were Kazuki Odin. They burst out into the stormy night, the wind and rain whipping at their face. They knew this island better than anyone. They knew the secret paths, the blind spots in the patrols. They moved with the certainty of a creature born to the wild, leaving the chaos and shouting of the beast pirates behind. They leapt from a cliff edge, their body shimmering and transforming midair into a divine wolf, a mythical creature with pearlescent white fur and flames whirling around its limbs like a celestial cloak. Landing silently in the forests far below, they took off at an impossible speed, a white streak against the dark landscape, heading toward the mainland. They were hunting for a fox. Naruto stood on a hill overlooking Ebisu town. It was a far cry from the opulent capital. The houses were ramshackle, built from scraps, but unlike the desolate villages of Kuri, there was life here. And laughter. A strange, unnerving, constant laughter. He could feel the energy of the people. It was warped, twisted. They were all smiling, all laughing, but there was no joy in it. It was a mask of happiness worn over a core of deep suffering. It was another symptom of the country's disease. He was about to head into the town to find Yasui when a new presence slammed into his senses. It was a colossal power, a raging inferno of life force barreling toward him at incredible speed. It was wild, chaotic, but not malicious. It felt joyous. He turned just as a figure burst from the tree line. It was a tall, imposing person, dressed in the garb of a samurai, with striking white hair that faded to green at the tips, held back by a golden hoop. Two prominent red horns jutted from their head, and on their face was a look of pure, unadulterated excitement. They carried a kanabo that looked like it could pulverize a mountain. Naruto recognized the energy signature instantly. This was Kaido's blood. The power was too similar, a raging storm of haki. The horned figure boomed, their voice filled with cheerful confidence. They pointed their massive club at Naruto. You're the Kitsune of Kuri, aren't you? I heard you were strong. I've been looking for you. Naruto raised an eyebrow. And who are you? I am Kazuki Odin, they declared with a proud grin. Naruto blinked. He had just heard the entire life story of Kazuki Odin. This person was definitely not him. Right, he said slowly. Look, I don't have time for games. I'm busy. This isn't a game, Yamato insisted, their grin widening. Odin's journal said that the world's strongest would be drawn to Wano for the final battle. I need to see if you're worthy of fighting alongside the man who will liberate this country. Before Naruto could protest further, Yamato attacked. They closed the distance in an instant, their kanabo whistling through the air, aimed directly at Naruto's head. Sheer force of the swing displaced the air, creating a miniature shockwave. Naruto moved, not with speed, but with instinct. He ducked under the swing, the wind from the club ruffling his hair. He twisted, his body flowing like water, and drove his elbow into Yamato's side. It was like striking a wall of solid steel. This person was tough, incredibly tough. Yamato laughed, unfazed. Good, you're fast. They spun, the kanabo coming around in a sweeping horizontal arc. Naruto leapt backward, the club smashing the ground where he had been standing, sending a shower of dirt and rock into the air. This was getting annoying. Hey, I told you, I'm not here to fight you. A true samurai speaks with his blade. Or in my case, my club. Yamato roared, pressing the attack. Show me your strength. Fine, if that's how it had to be. Naruto's demeanor shifted. The easygoing annoyance was replaced by the focused calm of a seasoned warrior. He met Yamato's next overhead smash not by dodging, but by catching the massive club on his forearm, which was now coated in a shimmering layer of black armament hockey. The impact created a deafening boom, and the ground beneath Naruto's feet fractured. Yamato's eyes widened in shock. No one, not even their father, had ever blocked Takeru so casually. Incredible, they cheered, their excitement growing. Naruto pushed the club back, sending Yamato stumbling a step. My turn. He formed a hand sign. 24 shadow clones popped into existence, surrounding the horned warrior. Let's see how you handle a crowd. The clones swarmed. Yamato roared with delight, swinging their kanabo in wide, devastating arcs, dispelling clones in puffs of smoke with every hit. They were a whirlwind of destruction, a one-person army. But the clones were relentless. They were a distraction, a feint. While Yamato was busy dealing with the horde, the real Naruto was gathering nature energy. The air around him grew heavy, the power of the very earth and sky flowing into him. Red pigment appeared around his eyes. He had entered Sage mode. He moved, a golden blur that was too fast for even Yamato to track. He appeared behind them as they smashed another clone. He didn't have a weapon. He didn't need one. He simply chopped the back of Yamato's neck with the side of his hand, a strike infused with a precise amount of sage-enhanced chakra. Yamato's eyes went wide. A jolt, like lightning, shot through their entire body. Their muscles seized. The mighty kanabo slipped from their grasp and thudded to the ground. Their knees buckled, and they fell forward, caught at the last second by Naruto. Are you done now? Naruto asked, his voice calm, the sage markings fading from his face. He gently lowered the unconscious warrior to the ground. Sheesh, so much energy. He was checking them for injuries when he noticed the manacles. He frowned, his fingers tracing the cold metal. They were thick, clearly made of sea stone, and engraved with Kaido's insignia. These weren't just restraints. They were a statement, a brand of ownership. A sudden wave of sympathy washed over him. This powerful, exuberant person, they were a prisoner. A rustle in the bushes announced a new arrival. Hiyori stepped out, followed by a small, stooped man in a patched kimono. It was Kinemon, her loyal retainer, whom she had contacted after Naruto left. They both stared at the scene. He unconscious child of Kaido at Naruto's feet. What have you done? Kinemon gasped, his hand flying to his sword. He attacked me, Naruto said simply, gesturing to Yamato. Don't worry, they're fine. Just taking a nap. Hiyori rushed forward, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and disbelief. This is Yamato, Kaido's son. Daughter, actually, Naruto corrected, having noticed during the brief fight. And I can feel the family resemblance. What's with the Odin fixation? Before anyone could answer, Yamato stirred, groaning. They sat up, rubbing the back of their neck. Wow, what was that? You didn't even hit me that hard, but my whole body just shut down. They looked at Naruto, their eyes shining with awe and admiration, not anger. You really are strong. You're amazing. They scrambled to their feet and bowed deeply to Naruto. My name is Yamato. I'm sorry for attacking you. Please, let me join your fight. I want to help you free Wano, just like Odin would have. Naruto, Hiyori, and Kinemon all stared, completely bewildered by the sudden, enthusiastic shift. Wait, you're Kaido's child, Kinemon said, his voice laced with suspicion. Why would you want to fight your own father? That monster is not my father, Yamato declared, their cheerful demeanor vanishing, replaced by a flash of pure hatred. He chained me to this island, beat me for admiring a hero, and tried to destroy Odin's will. I am Kazuki Odin. My spirit is with the Kazuki clan and the people of Wano. Hiyori looked from Yamato's passionate face to Naruto's calm one. The world was turning upside down. The son of her mortal enemy was declaring himself to be her father. And the strange man from another world was the one who had brought them together. Naruto looked at the two of them, Hiyori, the princess who had suffered in silence, and Yamato, the prisoner who had dreamed of freedom. He saw two sides of the same coin, two souls bound by the legacy of one great man and the tyranny of another. He had come to this land with no purpose, a leaf on the wind. But now, a path was forming before him. He stepped forward, standing between them, a bridge between two worlds. He looked at Hiyori, then at Yamato. "I don't know much about this Oden guy," he said, his voice quiet but ringing with an unshakable conviction that silenced them all. "But I know about fighting for your home. I know about breaking your chains. And I know that people shouldn't have to live in fear." He held out a hand to each of them. "You want to free this country. So do I. You want to honor the dream of Kazuki Oden. Then let's do it together." It was not a dramatic speech. It was a simple, heartfelt vow. It was the promise of a man who had saved one world and was now, inexplicably, being given the chance to save another. Hiyori looked at his outstretched hand, then at Yamato's hopeful, shining eyes. The spark of hope she had felt in the garden ignited into a flame. She placed her hand in his. Yamato, without a moment's hesitation, placed their hand on top of theirs, their grin returning, brighter than ever. In the distance, perched on a dead tree, a single, hawk-like bird watched the scene through its unnaturally sharp eyes. Its vision was being relayed miles away, to a darkened room where a figure in a white suit watched the living image projected by a Den Mushi. "Report," the cold voice of his superior commanded. "The anomaly, Naruto Uzumaki," the CP0 agent stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "He has made contact with both Kazuki Hiyori and Yamato. A pact has been formed. The rebellion now has a new, terrifyingly powerful core. The situation in Wano is no longer developing. It is about to explode." Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. Whispers of Rebellion. The laughter in Ebisu town was a sickness of the soul. It was a constant, jarring chorus that followed Naruto everywhere, a sound of merriment completely detached from the gaunt faces and desperate eyes of the people who produced it. They smiled as they starved. They chuckled as they patched the holes in their crumbling homes, they guffawed as they buried their dead. It was a town drowning in manufactured joy, and it was the most heartbreaking thing Naruto had seen in this broken country. Yasui, the former daimyo of Hakumai, welcomed them into his modest home with a smile that was, unlike the others, genuine, though it was framed by deep lines of sorrow. He was a man who carried the weight of his people's forced happiness on his stooped shoulders. He looked at the trio assembled before him: Naruto, the impossible stranger, Hiyori, the ghost princess he'd thought lost forever, and Yamato, the bewildering child of the monster who had destroyed their world. The daughter of Oden, and the son of Kaido, Yasui mused, stroking his distinctively shaped hair. Standing together with a man who fell from the sky. The stories they will tell of these days will be quite unbelievable. His gaze settled on Naruto. Kanamon sent word ahead. He said, "You have the will of a conqueror, but the eyes of a savior. A dangerous combination." "I'm just a man who's tired of watching bullies run the world," Naruto replied, his tone straightforward. He gestured to the town outside. "What is this place? Why are they like this?" Yasui's smile faltered for a moment. "They are the leftovers. The ones who defied Orochi, or were related to those who did. They were fed the defective smile fruits, the failed products from Doflamingo and Kaido's factories. It stole their ability to feel anything but joy. They cannot cry. They cannot rage. They can only smile, no matter the pain." A cold fury settled in Naruto's gut. It was a calculated, soul-crushing cruelty that went beyond mere oppression. It was the absolute desecration of the human spirit. He looked at Hiyori and saw her hands were clenched into fists, her knuckles white. He saw Yamato's face, usually so expressive, frozen in a mask of horrified disbelief. Oden's journal had spoken of heroes and villains, of adventure and tragedy, but it could never have captured the sheer, pathetic misery of this place. "This is the peace that Orochi and Kaido have brought to Wano," Hiyori said, her voice a low, venomous whisper. "A land that cannot even weep for itself." "Indeed," Yasui said, his eyes twinkling with a defiant spark. "Which is why we must fight. The Akazai and Nine are scattered. Some are in hiding, some are presumed dead, and some have lost their way. To bring them together now, after 20 years of failure and silence, will require more than just a call to arms. It will require a miracle." Quote, "Then we'll give them one," Naruto stated. He paced the small room, his mind already racing, piecing together the puzzle. "Communication is our biggest problem. Orochi's spies are everywhere. The country is carved into regions, and travel between them is restricted. We can't send messengers, they'll be caught. We can't light signal fires, they'll be seen. We need a way to speak to everyone. All at once, without a single word being overheard. Kinemon and Yasui looked at him, their expressions puzzled. Such a thing was impossible. Naruto simply smiled. It's time to cast a wider net. He walked outside into the center of the unsettlingly cheerful town. He closed his eyes, drawing on the vast ocean of chakra within him. He brought his hands together in a familiar cross seal. Taju Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. The world exploded in puffs of orange smoke. Not one, not a dozen, but hundreds upon hundreds of Naruto Uzumakis filled Ebisu town. They stood on rooftops, packed the narrow streets, and perched on fences, each one an identical, perfect copy of the original. The ever-present laughter of the townsfolk faltered, replaced by gasps of stunned silence. For the first time in years, a new expression appeared on their faces, utter, slack-jawed astonishment. Yasui, Hiyori, Kinemon, and Yamato stood frozen in the doorway, their minds struggling to comprehend the scene. Yamato's eyes were wide with childish wonder, as if they were witnessing a legend come to life. The original Naruto, standing in the center of the throng, addressed his army of duplicates. All right, listen up. You all have your assignments. Spread out across every region of Wano. Curry, Ringo, Kibi, Udon, and the flower capital. Be discreet. You are ghosts. Your job is intelligence. I want to know every beast pirate patrol route, every supply shipment, every guard rotation. Find the prisons, find the weapon caches, find the factories. And most importantly, find the samurai. Find anyone who still holds a spark of loyalty to the Kazuki clan. Find the Akazaya 9. He pointed to a specific group of clones. You lot, head to Curry. Find a man named Ashura Doji, the leader of the Adamayama thieves. He was one of the Akazaya. Do not engage him directly. Observe. Report back. He pointed to another group. You, to Ringo. The graveyards there are sacred. Look for a monk named Kawamatsu the Kappa. He was another. Be careful, he's been on the run for 20 years. He continued, rattling off names and locations provided by Yasui and Kinemon, his clones listening with perfect attention. They were a perfectly coordinated intelligence network, sprung into existence in a single moment. No matter what you find, your primary mission is to not get caught, Naruto concluded. Use the transformation jutsu. Blend in. Become fishermen, farmers, merchants, even pirates if you have to. But do not reveal our hand. Now, go. With a collective shout, the clones scattered. They leapt over rooftops, blurred into the forests, and vanished from sight in a matter of seconds. Within a minute, Ebisu town was quiet again, save for the resumed, albeit slightly more hesitant, laughter of its people. Naruto stood alone, breathing a little heavily. The chakra cost of creating and sustaining that many clones, each with a mission to think and act independently across a vast country, was immense. Even for him, it was a strain. Yamato ran up to him, their eyes sparkling. That was the most incredible thing I have ever seen. It's like a technique from the myths. How did you do that? It's an old trick, Naruto said with a weary grin. He looked at Hiyori, whose expression was one of profound, reassessing awe. The brash confidence he'd shown in her garden wasn't just talk. He possessed power on a scale she had never imagined. He wasn't just a warrior, he was an army. Now, Naruto said, his gaze sweeping over the horizon. We wait, and we listen to the whispers. In a dimly lit chamber deep within the shogun's palace, a man knelt before a hanging scroll bearing the Kurozumi clan's crest. He was a thin, weaselly man with skin the color of old parchment and small, dark eyes that darted about nervously. A scorpion tattoo coiled around his neck, its stinger resting just below his ear. This was Scabrous Kanjiki, a high-ranking headliner in the Beast Pirates. On loan to Orochi as the head of his internal intelligence network. Unlike his boisterous, sake-guzzling comrades, Kanjiki thrived in the shadows. He dealt in secrets, fear, and betrayal. Lord Orochi, he hissed, his voice like the dry rustle of insect legs. My agents in Curry report a strange phenomenon. Rumors of the Kitsune are spreading faster than is natural. More than that, Small acts of sabotage have begun. A food shipment for the mines went missing. A watchtower on the coast was found abandoned, its garrison vanished without a trace. These are minor incidents, but the pattern is new. It is coordinated. The shoji screen before him slid open, revealing the shogun Kurozumi Orochi. He was a grotesque figure with an absurdly long torso and multiple heads, his face a permanent sneer of paranoia and arrogance. Coordinated. Orochi scoffed, taking a long drink of sake. It is the desperate flailing of rats. The samurai are broken. The spirit of Wano is dead. I killed it myself, 20 years ago, with Odin. Perhaps, my lord, Kanjiki said, his head still bowed. But these are not the actions of desperate men. They are precise. It feels as if one person is seeing the entire board. My spies report whispers of a new hope, but they cannot find the source. It's like chasing the wind. I believe someone is uniting the remnants of the rebellion, and doing so with impossible speed and secrecy. Orochi slammed his sake cup down. Find them, he shrieked, his mane head turning a furious shade of purple. I want this. Hope, found and crucified in the center of the capital. I want their head on a spike. Double the patrols. Arrest anyone who even speaks the Kazuki name. I will not have my peace disturbed by the ghosts of the past. As you command, Lord Orochi, Kanjiki said, a thin, cruel smile touching his lips. He enjoyed the hunt, and this new prey, this ghost who moved without a trace, presented a fascinating challenge. He would not find them by casting a wider net. He would find them by setting the perfect trap. In the rugged, untamed wilderness of Kuri, Ashura Doji, now known as the Bandit King Shudenmaru, sat before a roaring bonfire, a massive gourd of sake in his hand. His men, a rough collection of masterless samurai and outlaws, were feasting on a stolen boar behind him. He was a mountain of a man, his presence as wild and untamable as the lands he ruled. 20 years had passed since the day his lord, Odin, had been executed. 20 years of waiting for a prophecy that never came to pass. He had lost his faith. All that remained was the rage and the sake. One of his lookouts suddenly landed in the clearing. Boss, we've got a problem. A whole platoon of beast pirates, led by one of the numbers, is heading this way. They're escorting a massive cage. Looks like they're rounding up villagers for the udon mines. Ashura's eyes narrowed. This was unusual. The beast pirates usually left his territory alone. It was an unspoken agreement. He didn't interfere with their factories. And they didn't interfere with his banditry. Attacking his domain so brazenly was a provocation. He stood, hefting his massive club onto his shoulder. They've grown bold, he grunted. Let's go remind them who rules this mountain. As his men rallied, a figure dropped from the trees, landing silently before him. It was a man in a simple farmer's tunic. Ashura's men instantly drew their swords. But the bandit king held up a hand. He had seen this man before, lurking at the edge of his territory for the past few days. You've been watching me, Ashura stated, his voice a low rumble. You're no farmer. Who are you? The farmer shimmered and transformed, his features morphing into those of Naruto Uzumaki. It was one of the clones. My name is Naruto, and I think you're walking into a trap. Ashura laughed, a deep, booming sound. A trap, boy. I have been fighting Kaido's men since before you were born. I know how to handle a few dozen grunts and one of those drunken giants. It's not about the fight, the clone said patiently. It's about the cage. They want you to attack. They want you to see the prisoners. They know you have a soft spot for the people of Kuri. While you're busy with the platoon and freeing the villagers, a second, elite force will flank you from the gorge to the east. They'll have you surrounded. Ashura stared at the clone, his bravado giving way to a flicker of suspicion. How could you possibly know that? Because I have a friend sitting in a tree overlooking that gorge right now, the clone said with a shrug. Another one who was disguised as a rock near their camp last night, listening to their plans. This attack isn't about prisoners. It's about you. Someone wants you captured or dead. The bandit king was silent for a long moment. Studying the blonde man, he radiated a confidence that was unnerving. The information was specific, too specific to be a simple guess. And what do you propose? Ashura asked, his voice now laced with grudging respect. The clone grinned. They want to spring a trap. Let's spring a bigger one. When the Beast Pirates platoon marched into the clearing, they found it deserted. The bonfires were still smoldering, but the bandits were gone. The commander, a hulking man with a hyena's jaw, sneered. "Cowards. They ran," he grunted. "Unchain the prisoners. Make them scream. We'll draw the big pig out." As his men unlocked the cage filled with weeping villagers, the attack came. Not from the front, but from above and behind. Ashura Doji and his men descended from the cliffsides like an avalanche. Their battle cries echoing through the trees. The beast pirates were thrown into chaos, caught completely by surprise. But as the battle raged, the hyena commander smiled. "Fools. Now," he bellowed. From the gorge to the east, the second force charged, expecting to slam into the bandits' exposed flank. Instead, they were met by a wall of spinning, blue energy. Rasengan. A dozen Narutos, each wielding a swirling sphere of chakra, smashed into the elite force's front line. The pirates were sent flying, their armor crumpling like paper. The ambushers had been ambushed. Ashura Doji, in the midst of the main battle, saw the chaos erupting in the gorge and saw the multiple blonde figures tearing through the enemy's ranks. He roared with laughter, a genuine, joyous sound he hadn't made in years. This wasn't just a fight, it was a brilliantly executed masterpiece of strategy. He swung his club with renewed vigor, his spirit, long dormant, stirring back to life. The battle was a rout. The beast pirates, caught between the ferocious bandits and a small army of inexplicable super-powered clones, were utterly crushed. When the dust settled, Ashura Doji stood over the defeated hyena commander. His foot on the man's chest. He looked over at the Naruto clone, who was helping the villagers out of their cage. "You," Ashura called out. "What is your goal in Wano?" "To finish the job Odin started." The clone replied simply, "To open its borders and give its people their freedom." Ashura was silent for a moment. He then turned to his men. "We've been thieves and scavengers for 20 years, he bellowed, his voice echoing with newfound purpose. "Living off the scraps of a dying country. No more. Today, we remember who we are. We are the samurai of Kuri. We fight for the dawn. We fight for Kazuki." A roar of approval went up from his men. For the first time in 2 decades, the banner of the rebellion had a new, powerful army behind it. Ashura looked back at the clone, who gave him a nod of acknowledgement before vanishing in a puff of smoke. The bandit king grinned. A miracle, indeed. The information from the clone in Kuri flowed back to the original Naruto in Ebisu town. With it came streams of data from hundreds of other clones across the country. He sat in meditation, a living nexus of intelligence, processing the vast, multi-layered map of Wano that was forming in his mind. A new piece of information suddenly arrived, sharp and urgent. It was from a clone in the flower capital, one who had been tasked with observing the movements around the shogun's palace. The clone had followed a known informant for Kanjiki and overheard a plan. Kanjiki, furious at the failure in Kuri, had devised a new trap. He was spreading a rumor that Denjiro, another of the Akazaya 9, was hiding out in a remote shrine in the Ringo region. He knew the rebellion would be desperate to recruit him. The shrine would be surrounded by hundreds of Orochi's elite guards, the Anawabanshu, and a dozen of the gifters from the beast pirates. It was a kill box. Naruto's eyes snapped open. He immediately sought out Hiyori, who was tending to some of the children in the town. "Hiyori, I need your help," he said, his tone urgent. "I know Orochi has a network of informants. But you were Komurasaki. You were at the heart of his court. You must have your own." Hiyori's eyes hardened. The world of the Warren is built on secrets. A courtesan hears every whisper, every drunken boast, every pillow talk confession. I have ears in every corner of that city. What do you need? Kanjiki is spreading a rumor about Denjiro's location in Ringo. I need to know if it's genuine. Hiyori's expression turned grim. Denjiro vanished without a trace after the fire at Odin Castle. No one has seen him in 20 years. A sudden rumor about his location now, it feels false. She closed her eyes for a moment. There is a geisha, a young girl I took under my wing. Her primary Cly, NT is the vice captain of the Anawabanshu. Let me see what she knows. She found a quiet corner and produced a small, ornately carved den mushi. It was a private line, one only a handful of people could call. She spoke in low, coded phrases, her voice a soft murmur. After a few minutes, She ended the call, her face pale. It's a trap, she confirmed. The vice captain boasted to her last night. They are mobilizing a huge force to Ringo, under the pretense of a training exercise. They expect the rebellion's leaders to come personally to recruit Denjiro. They plan to wipe us out in a single stroke. Yamato, who had joined them, slammed a fist into their palm. That cowardly scorpion. Then we should avoid Ringo completely. No, Naruto said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. We're not going to avoid it. We're going to give Kanjiki exactly what he wants. He looked at Yamato, then at Hiyori. He wants the rebellion's leaders. Fine, he'll get them. The night of the supposed rendezvous in Ringo was cold and moonless. The shrine was nestled deep in a forest of snow-covered pines, a silent, ominous place. Hidden in the trees, surrounding the shrine on all sides, were hundreds of Orochi's forces. Kanjiki was there himself, perched like a vulture on a high branch, his small eyes scanning the darkness, savoring the anticipation. Suddenly, 3 figures appeared on the path leading to the shrine. In the center was a tall, powerfully built man with blonde hair. To his left, a towering figure with white hair and red horns. To his right, a woman of peerless beauty, her face set with determination. It was the Kitsune, Kaido's child, and the ghost princess herself. They were walking right into his trap. Idiots, Kanjiki hissed to himself, his lips pulling back in a triumphant sneer. Their arrogance has blinded them. He raised his hand, ready to give the signal to attack. Now, the forest erupted with noise and movement. The Anawabanshu and the gifters swarmed out from their hiding places. A tidal wave of steel and fury, descending on the 3 figures. But as they closed in, the figures of Naruto, Yamato, and Hiyori dissolved into puffs of smoke. They were shadow clones. Kanjiki froze, his mind reeling. What? A trick. At that exact moment, a new sound filled the air. A low, rumbling roar that grew louder and louder. It wasn't coming from the shrine. It was coming from behind them. Kanjiki spun around. On the ridge overlooking their position, silhouetted against the pale glow of the snowy landscape, was an army. At its head stood Ashura Doji and his bandits, now armed and armored like a true samurai force. And beside them stood the real Naruto and Yamato. It seems your trap had a hole in it, Naruto's voice called out, amplified by the still night air. Kanjiki's blood ran cold. He had been played. He hadn't been hunting them. They had been hunting him. Attack! He shrieked, his voice cracking with panic. But it was too late. Ashura Doji let out a tremendous battle cry and led the charge down the hill. The ambushers, their formation broken, their backs exposed, were thrown into utter chaos. Yamato followed, their kanabo a whirlwind of destruction. Their laughter booming across the battlefield. Reimei Hake. The blast of Conqueror's Haki that accompanied the blow sent a score of Anawabanshu flying before the club even connected. Naruto moved through the chaos like a phantom. He wasn't targeting the soldiers. He was targeting the head of the snake. He appeared before Kanjiki in a flicker of movement, his eyes glowing with the power of Sage Mode. Kanjiki, in his terror, revealed his own power. His body contorted, transforming into a monstrous human-scorpion hybrid, a stinger dripping with purple venom whipping from his back. He lunged, aiming for Naruto's heart. Naruto didn't even bother to dodge. He simply raised a hand. Shinra Tensai, an invisible, almighty force erupted from his palm. Kanjiki was blasted backward as if hit by a cannonball. His transformation faltering, he slammed into a tree with enough force to snap its trunk, his armor shattering, his bones breaking. He slid to the ground, a broken, wheezing heap. Naruto walked over and looked down at the defeated spymaster. You rely on lies and fear, he said, his voice cold. But you can't trap a whisper. And right now, that's all we are. But soon, he promised. We will be a storm that will tear your rotten kingdom apart. The battle was over as quickly as it had begun. Orochi's elite forces were scattered and broken. It was a devastating BL. Out of the shogun's power and a monumental victory for the burgeoning rebellion. Later, back at their new base in the caves behind Adamayama, a quiet moment fell. Hiyori was tending to the wounded, her movements calm and efficient. Earning the respect of the gruff samurai. Yamato was arm wrestling with Ashura Doji, their laughter echoing through the cavern. Naruto stood at the mouth of the cave, looking out at the vast expanse of Wano. Hiyori came and stood beside him. "You did it," she said softly. "You took his greatest weapon, his network of spies, and turned it against him. You gave us our first real victory." "We did it," Naruto corrected, looking at her. "Your information saved us. Without you, my clones would have walked right into that shrine. We all have a part to play." There was a comfortable silence between them. The shared victory a powerful bond. He saw the admiration in her eyes, and she saw the unwavering resolve in his. It was a connection forged not in flirtation or romance, but in the fires of a shared purpose, a mutual respect that was deeper and more profound than either. From a snow-laden peak miles away, the CP0 agent lowered his binoculars. He'd watched the entire debacle through a telescope. He clicked his Den Mushi. "Report. Kanjiki has been eliminated. Orochi's intelligence network is in shambles. The target, Naruto Uzumaki, has united the Curry bandits under his command. His strategic acumen is unprecedented. He utilized a network of solid doppelgangers for wide-scale reconnaissance and then used them as a strategic feint to lure the enemy into a counter-ambush. He is not just some powerful brawler. He is a general of the highest caliber. Our initial assessment is no longer valid. He is not a variable. He is a catalyst. Wano is on the verge of a full-scale revolution. Far ahead of schedule." A long pause from the other end. "The 5 elders have been briefed," the cold voice finally said. "Maintain observation. But prepare for intervention. The fruit is not yet ripe. But this, Uzumaki, is shaking the tree too hard. We may have to cut it down ourselves." Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Fire Festival. The flower capital was a city holding its breath. On the surface, it was an explosion of life, a frantic, joyous spectacle. The annual Fire Festival, a tribute to the fallen and a prayer for the future, had transformed the streets into a river of light and sound. Paper lanterns painted the night in hues of red and gold. The air, thick with the scent of street food and blooming cherry blossoms, vibrated with the rhythm of taiko drums and the shrill call of flutes. Citizens and off-duty pirates alike drank and danced, their faces flushed with sake and excitement, their laughter echoing off the elegant wooden buildings. It was a perfect picture of prosperity and celebration. For Hiyori, it was the most beautiful life she had ever been forced to live. Seated on a silk cushion in the shogun's grand banquet hall, she was once again Komurasaki. The brightest star in Orochi's gilded firmament. Her face was a flawless mask of white paint, her lips a perfect red blossom. Her kimono, a priceless work of art depicting golden cranes in flight, felt as heavy as a suit of armor. She poured sake for the shogun, her movements a study in practiced grace, her smile serene and unwavering. But beneath the placid surface, her heart hammered against her ribs like a war drum. Every beat was a countdown. Tonight, the lie would burn. Orochi, in his gaudy purple robes, was in his element. He guzzled sake, his multiple heads weaving and cackling as the beast pirate officers and sycophantic officials around him roared with laughter at his every jest. 20 years, he slurred, slamming his cup down for a refill, which Hiyori provided without a flicker of emotion. 20 years since I cleansed this country of that fool Odin and his ridiculous dreams. They said his ghost would return. They said his samurai would rise. And what do I see? He gestured grandly at the opulent hall, at the mountains of food and rivers of alcohol. Peace, prosperity, the only thing rising in Wano is my fortune. The pirates bellowed their approval. Hiyori's smile remained fixed, but her eyes, for a fraction of a second, drifted toward the massive paper windows that looked out over the capital. The fireworks were beginning, great peonies of color exploding silently in the night sky. They were the signal. She thought of Naruto, of his calm, confident eyes as he'd laid out the plan. It was a plan of such audacious complexity and precision that it had left even the veteran samurai of the Akazaya Nine breathless. It wasn't a brutish charge, it was surgery with a sword. She thought of Yamato, whose entire being had seemed to vibrate with an almost unbearable excitement. The chance to finally, openly fight for the ideals they held so dear. Her role was just as critical. She was the anchor, the last piece of the puzzle, the eye of the hurricane. She had to hold Orochi's attention. To keep this banquet, the very heart of the enemy's leadership, blissfully unaware until the last possible moment. More sake, Lord Orochi?" she asked, her voice a silken melody. "Yes. Pour until the cups overflow." He cackled. "Tonight, we celebrate the strength of my rule and the might of our benefactor, the great Lord Kaido." As he spoke the name, the very foundations of the palace shuddered. It was not an earthquake. It was a series of deep, concussive booms, distant enough to be mistaken for a particularly grand firework, but Hiyori knew better. It was Kawamatsu and the Minks. Their naval force striking the port of Onigashima, the first wave of the grand distraction. The heads of the enemy would turn north, toward the sea, while the knife slipped in from the south. The first hint that something was wrong came not as a shout, but as a flicker of confusion. A beast pirate officer, stumbling back into the hull from a latrine break, had a puzzled look on his face. "Hey," he mumbled to his companion. "Did you hear that? Sounded like fighting down by the treasury." His words were cut short as his eyes rolled back in his head and he collapsed, a single, almost invisible Senbon needle sticking from the back of his neck. A disguised Naruto clone, working as a server, caught the man before he hit the floor and dragged him silently into the shadows. Sabotage. Chaos from within. The whispers had begun. Outside, on the shores of Onigashima, the real battle was being joined. The main force of the rebellion, led by the remaining Akazaya and the newly galvanized samurai of Kuri, swarmed from their hidden boats, their battle cries finally cutting through the festival music. But this was not the primary attack. It was merely the second layer of the grand feint. The true tip of the spear was miles from the main assault. Naruto led a small, elite team, Yamato, Kinemon, and a handful of others, along a treacherous, windswept cliff face on the far side of the island. It was a route his clones had discovered, a forgotten access tunnel used by the island's original builders, long since deemed impassable. "The internal communications are down," Naruto said, his voice quiet but clear over the howling wind. He had a hand pressed to the rock, his eyes closed, sensing the vibrations and chakra signatures within the fortress. "My clones have taken out the main Den Mushi posts. The guards are confused, getting conflicting reports of attacks at the port and the main gate. They don't know where to focus. Yamato, you know the layout. Once we're inside, get us to the performance stage, directly below the banquet hall." "With pleasure." Yamato grinned, their grip tightening on their kanabo. The explosive seastone cuffs were gone, shattered by a precise, hockey-infused strike from Naruto just before the mission began. For the first time in their adult life, they were truly free, and their power radiated from them like an unchecked force of nature. They slipped into the tunnel, a dark, narrow passage that smelled of brine and decay. They moved with a speed and silence that defied the enclosed space. Within minutes, they were inside the Skull Fortress. In the labyrinthine corridors behind the main halls. The sounds of panic were growing louder now, the distant clash of steel and panicked shouts echoing through the stone. They ached the cavernous area beneath the main stage. As expected, it was chaos. Low-level pirates and entertainers were running about, unsure of where the attack was coming from. Naruto's team moved through them like ghosts. They were not here to fight grunts. They were here to decapitate the snake. "Here," Yamato whispered, pointing to a massive wooden lift used to bring performers and props up to the stage. "This will take us right into the heart of it." "Kinemon," Naruto ordered. "Foxfire flame split. Be ready to cut through steel and fire. Everyone else, prepare yourselves. The moment those doors open, we end this." In the banquet hall, the confusion had become a palpable tension. Several more officers had vanished. Reports of fighting were now too loud and too close to ignore. Orochi's face had lost its drunken flush, replaced by a pale, sweaty sheen of fear. "What is the meaning of this?" he shrieked at his guards. "Who is attacking my castle?" The captain of his Onawabanshu appeared, his face grim. "Lord Orochi, it's a full-scale rebellion. The samurai, they're here. They've breached the main gates." Orochi's eyes darted around wildly. "The samurai? Impossible. Where is Kaido?" As if in answer to his question. The very center of the floor, the grand performance stage before the shogun's dais, exploded upwards. Wood, tatami mats, and bodies were thrown into the air as the massive lift platform smashed through. Standing upon it, wreathed in smoke and dust, were Naruto, Yamato, and the leaders of the Akazaya Nine, their weapons drawn, their faces masks of cold fury. For a moment, there was a stunned silence. The pirates and guards stared, their minds failing to process the impossible sight of the enemy appearing, quite literally, from beneath their feet. Then, all hell broke loose. For Kazuki Oden, Kinemon roared, and the samurai charged. Yamato let out a joyous, earth-shaking battle cry and leapt from the platform, their kanabo swinging. Reime Hake, a wave of black and red lightning, the unmistakable sign of a conqueror's haki, blasted outwards, and a dozen of the heavily armored guards around Orochi collapsed without being touched, foam bubbling on their lips. The club itself connected with the Oniwabanshu captain, sending him flying through the paper wall and out into the night. Hiyori moved in that first second of chaos. The priceless kimono was torn away, revealing the practical, combat-ready shinobi-style garb she wore beneath. A small, elegant blade was in her hand. Her target wasn't Orochi, it was the guards closest to him. She moved, with a dancer's grace and an assassin's finality, her blade a silver flicker in the lantern light. The banquet hall degenerated into a maelstrom of violence. The Akazaya, fueled by 20 years of rage, were an unstoppable force, cutting down Orochi's guards. But the beast pirates were not mere fodder. The headliners and gifters began to rally, their bizarre devil fruit transformations turning the opulent hall into a surreal battlefield. Naruto ignored it all. His eyes were locked on one target. He moved through the chaos, a blur of orange and black, effortlessly evading the wild swings of AG. Iftar, who had turned his arms into massive praying mantis scythes. He appeared before the shogun's dais as if teleported. Orochi shrieked, a high, pathetic sound, and fumbled for the katana at his side. He was a swordsman of some skill, but he was paralyzed by terror. He stared into Naruto's eyes, and he saw no anger, no hatred. He saw only a vast, cold certainty. It was the look of a man who had made a decision, and for whom the outcome was already a settled fact. Naruto's hand shot out and clamped around Orochi's throat. He lifted the shogun into the air, the man's legs kicking uselessly. Fighting in the hall began to falter as all eyes turned to the scene. The rebellion had its leader. The shogun was taken. It's over, Orochi, Naruto said, his voice cutting through the din. Then, he cornered Rat did something unexpected. It didn't beg, it tried to bargain. Wait, Orochi choked out, his eyes bulging. You are the outsider. The Kitsune. You are not one of them. You don't want this senseless slaughter. The Akazaya 9 were closing in, their blades dripping with blood, their faces contorted with a righteous hatred 2 decades in the making. Give him to us, one of them snarled. Let us avenge our lord. Stop, Naruto commanded, and to their own surprise, the samurai halted. Listen to me, Orochi rasped, sensing a sliver of opportunity. You want to stop Kaido? Yes. I can help you. This island, its defenses, the Oniwabanshu, the capital guard, they are all loyal to me, not him. Spare me, and I will give them to you. We can fight Kaido together. Think of the lives you'll save. A word from me, and the fighting in the capital stops. No more dead samurai, no more dead citizens. Is their bloodthirsty revenge more important than a lasting peace? He was clever. Naruto had to give him that. He was appealing not to mercy, but to logic. To the pragmatic mind of a leader. He was trying to frame the Akazaya's desire for justice as petty vengeance, and himself as the key to a bloodless coup. He was trying to drive a wedge between Naruto and his new allies. Hiyori watched, her blade held ready, her heart pounding. She saw the samurai hesitate. The offer was seductive, an end to the fighting. The resources of the shogun turned against Kaido. It was the smart move. The strategic move, but it was a deal with a demon. She looked at Naruto, praying he would see the poison in the offer. Naruto looked at the squirming, desperate man in his grasp. He thought of the poisoned rivers of curry, the slave mines of Udon, and the beautiful, terrible, unending laughter of Ebisu town. He thought of the 20 years of suffering this man had inflicted upon a proud and noble people. He turned his head slightly, his gaze finding Hiyori in the crowd. Their eyes met for a long second, a silent communication passing between them. He saw her fear, her hope, her trust. And he gave her a look that said, I remember my promise. He turned back to Orochi, and a small, cold smile touched his lips. You talk about peace, Naruto said, his voice dangerously quiet. yet it carried to every corner of the hull. But your peace is a lie. It's the peace of a poisoned well. The peace of a town that can't cry. You're not offering to save lives, you're offering to save your own skin. He tightened his grip, and Orochi wheezed. The people of this country don't need a new deal with a snake, Naruto continued. His voice rising with a power that vibrated in the very air, a hint of the conqueror's will leaking out. They need the snake's head to be cut off so they can finally breathe. He slammed Orochi down onto the dais, the wood cracking under the impact. The shogun lay in a crumpled, gasping heap. He is yours, Naruto said to the Akazaya. But not like this, not in a fit of rage. He will be tried. He will face the justice of the new Wano you are all bleeding to create. A country of laws, not of tyrants or vengeance. Secure him. The samurai, stunned by his words, moved to obey. They saw the wisdom in it. This wasn't just about killing a man. It was about killing an idea. It was about building something new. But they never got the chance. The entire roof of the skull dome was ripped away with a deafening screech of tearing metal and splintering wood. A shadow fell over the banquet hall, and a pressure descended that made the very air feel thick and heavy. A voice, dripping with disappointment and a rage that seemed to shake the foundations of the island, boomed from the heavens. I leave you alone for one party, Orochi, and you manage to lose my island for me. Everyone looked up. Swirling in the stormy night sky, his colossal body blotting out the stars, was a dragon. An immense, azure eastern dragon, his eyes glowing like malevolent lanterns, his whiskers longer than ships. Kaido had arrived. He wasn't drunk. He was utterly, terrifyingly sober. His gaze swept over the scene of carnage, over his defeated officers, over the captured shogun. And then his eyes, filled with a predator's curiosity and fury, landed on the blonde-haired man standing over his broken ally. So, Kaido's voice thundered, seeming to come from all directions at once. You're the one they're calling the fox. Naruto looked up, his orange jacket fluttering in the sudden downdraft from the dragon's massive form. He stood his ground, flanked by Yamato and the Akazaya 9, the rebellion united behind him. The raid was a success. The shogun was defeated, but the war had just begun. Hidden in the shattered remains of the rafters, a figure in a white suit adjusted the focus on a small telescopic den mushi, transmitting the impossible scene. He was so close to the dragon that the heat from its body washed over him. He spoke into a second, encrypted snail, his voice a perfectly calm whisper amidst the unfolding apocalypse. Report, he said to himself, dictating the message. Stage 1 of the rebellion is a success. Kurozumi Orochi has been neutralized. The target, Naruto Uzumaki, is in direct confrontation with the Emperor, Kaido. The battle for Wano has begun. The balance of power is not shattering. It has shattered. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. King of Beasts vs. The Nine-Tailed Sage. The air itself seemed to curdle. Kaido's presence was a physical weight, a gravitational pull of pure, murderous intent that silenced the screams and snuffed out the fires. The beast pirates, who had been moments from breaking, now roared with a renewed, fanatical zeal. Their god had descended. For the samurai of the rebellion, the sight was a specter from their worst nightmares. The living embodiment of the tragedy that had defined their lives for 2 decades. Hope, so bright a moment ago, now seemed like a flickering candle in a hurricane. Naruto didn't flinch. He simply tilted his head back, his gaze meeting the dragon's molten gold eyes. The pressure was immense, a conqueror's haki so dense it felt like being at the bottom of the deepest ocean trench. But he had faced the will of a god who created chakra. He had stood against a creature made of pure, planet-ending malice. This was familiar territory, so, Kaido's voice thundered, the sound less like speech and more like the grinding of continents. You're the one they're calling the fox. Before anyone could draw another breath, Kaido acted. There was no boast, no monologue. There was only annihilation. His great serpentine maw opened, and a torrent of incandescent energy, a focused beam of pure destruction, erupted forth. Boro breath. The world turned white and gold. The heat was instantaneous, vaporizing stone and steel in its path. It wasn't aimed at Naruto. It was aimed at the dais, at the captured Orochi and the Akazaya 9 who surrounded him, an attempt to wipe the entire leadership of the rebellion. And his own failed ally, from existence in a single, contemptuous blast. The samurai froze, their eyes wide with the acceptance of their own imminent oblivion. They had no time to move, no way to counter. But Naruto was already there. He appeared in front of them in a golden flash, a blur of movement that seemed to bend space itself. He didn't try to block. He didn't try to overpower. He thrust both hands forward. Palms open. Futon. Rasenshuriken. He didn't throw it. He held it. A spinning shuriken of pure wind chakra, impossibly dense and screaming like 1,000 banshees, materialized in front of his hands. It was not a normal Rasenshuriken. He poured the nature energy of Sage Mode into it, stabilizing the vortex, turning it from a blade into a shield. The Boro breath slammed into the spinning vortex. It was not an explosion. It was a grinding, shrieking battle of cosmic forces. The dragon's fiery blast was shredded, its energy torn apart at a molecular level. By the countless microscopic wind blades of the jutsu, light and force erupted outwards, not forwards, blasting the walls of the ruined hall apart and sending everyone, pirate and samurai alike, tumbling through the air. When the light faded, the dais was gone. A deep, cauterized trench was carved through the heart of the skull dome. But in the center of the devastation, Naruto stood, his orange jacket torn, his arms steaming. But his feet planted firm. Behind him, the Akazaya and Orochi were alive, untouched, shielded by his body and the dissipating remnants of his technique. Silence. A profound, disbelieving silence fell over Onigashima. Not even the wind dared to move. Everyone, from the lowest pirate grunt to the most seasoned samurai, stared at the impossible sight. Someone had just et Kaido's Boro breath head-on and nullified it. Such a thing was not supposed to be possible. Kaido's dragon eyes narrowed, a flicker of genuine surprise in their depths. Oh, so the rumors weren't exaggerated. It was then that Yamato chose to make their stand. They leapt forward, landing beside Naruto, their kanabo held ready, their eyes blazing with a fire that matched Kaido's own. "I am no longer your child," Yamato declared, their voice ringing with the conviction of a life's dream finally realized. "You tried to chain my body, but you could never chain my soul. My heart belongs to the man you murdered. I am Kazuki Oden, and I will defeat you." A low, dangerous growl rumbled in Kaido's chest. This, more than the stranger's power, seemed to truly anger him. It was a personal, profound betrayal. "You are my child," he snarled, his voice dripping with disappointment. Not his ghost. He moved, faster than anything of his size should be able to. His massive, scaled head lunged down from the heavens. Yamato met the charge with a roar, swinging their kanabo in a hockey-infused arc. Narikabura arrow. The club connected with Kaido's snout. The sound was like a mountain cracking in half. But the dragon didn't even flinch. His charge continued unabated, and he swatted Yamato with the side of his head. It was a focused, brutal blow, not meant to kill but to punish, to remind. Yamato was sent flying like a cannonball, crashing through the far wall of the fortress and disappearing into the stormy night. "Yamato!" Hiyori screamed. "They're fine," Naruto said, his gaze never leaving Kaido. "Tough as they come. This is my fight now." He entered Six Paths Sage Mode. The transformation was instantaneous. A cloak of yellow chakra flared to life around him, 9 black truth seeki ing orbs materializing behind his back in a silent, perfect halo. His skin glowed with an inner light, his eyes a cross of toad sage and fox pupil. He rose into the air, levitating effortlessly until he was eye level with the colossal dragon. The fight began in earnest. Kaido unleashed a storm of demolition gusts, razor-sharp blades of wind that could slice through steel. Naruto weaved through them, the air his playground. He shaped one of his truth-seeking orbs into a long, black staff and met the dragon in the sky. It was a battle of scale versus speed, of brute force versus impossible versatility. Naruto was a gnat, a fly buzzing around a god, yet every move he made was a threat. He used his clones as diversions, having them appear from all angles, peppering Kaido's hide with Rasengans that exploded like mortar shells. They did no visible damage to the dragon's scales, but they were distractions, forcing Kaido to divide his attention. While Kaido was occupied with a dozen clones, the real Naruto would strike. He used his black staff to parry one of the dragon's claws, the impact sending a shockwave that flattened a section of the forest below. He was searching for a weakness, a chink in the impenetrable armor. It's useless, boy, Kaido roared, unleashing another Boro breath that Naruto was forced to evade. Nothing can harm me. I am indestructible. Everyone thinks that, right up until they're not. Naruto called back, his voice calm. He appeared above Kaido's head, both hands forming a single, massive Rasengan, pulsing with raw nature energy. Sage art. Massive Rasengan. He slammed the sphere down onto Kaido's skull. The resulting explosion was immense, a dome of white energy that engulfed the dragon's head. But when it cleared, Kaido was merely shaking his head as if to clear away a minor annoyance. He was laughing. Worororo. Is that all? A pleasant massage. Frustration was building in Naruto. This was like fighting the 10 Tails all over again, a creature of pure, overwhelming power. He needed more. He needed to get past those scales. And then he saw it. The scar. A massive, cross-shaped scar on the dragon's side, the only blemish on his otherwise perfect scales. The scar left by Kazuki Oden. A wound that had never truly healed. A point of physical and spiritual vulnerability. That was the target. As if sensing Naruto's change in focus, Kaido shifted. This form is too slow for you. He growled. The colossal dragon began to shrink, to contort, wreathed in smoke and black lightning. When the transformation was complete, a new figure stood amidst the wreckage of the skull dome. He was still immense, towering over normal men, but now in a hybrid, humanoid form. Blue scales covered his body, a wild mane of black hair flowed down his back, and horns were now a demonic crown on his head. He held a massive, spiked kanabo, the same as Yamato's but larger, more menacing. The pressure he exuded intensified tenfold. This was not a beast of nature. This was a god of war. Let's see how you handle this, Kaido snarled, and vanished. He reappeared in front of Naruto, his club swinging, coated in the sinister black-red lightning of advanced conqueror's haki. Naruto brought his truth-seeking orb staff up to block. The impact was cataclysmic. The black staff, a substance that could nullify any ninjutsu, shattered into dust. The force of the blow sent Naruto rocketing downward, carving a trench through the island's very bedrock. He emerged from the rubble, coughing up a trickle of blood. The chakra cloak around him was flickering. That CNGLE blow had done more damage than the entire fight thus far. This was haki on a level he had never encountered, a power that could seemingly bypass conventional durability. That's the king's ambition, Kaido sneered, descending slowly. The will to dominate all things. An outsider like you wouldn't understand. Naruto wiped the blood from his lip and stood up straight, the chakra cloak stabilizing. I've met a few people who wanted to dominate everything, he said, his voice low. They're all dead, and I understand you're just fine. It's the will of a bully who's never been punched back hard enough. He held out his hand. The chakra around him began to swirl, condensing. He was infusing his own armament haki, not just with chakra, but with the boundless energy of Sage Mode. The result was a shimmering, golden aura around his fist, a perfect fusion of the powers of his old world and the new. Let's see whose will is stronger, Naruto said. He shot forward, and Kaido met his charge. Their fists collided. There was no sound, only a silent, expanding dome of pure force that blew everything away. The sky split. The sea around Wano churned and boiled. The very island of Onigashima groaned, great cracks appearing across its surface. While the gods clashed in the heavens, the war raged on below. King and Queen, the two lead all-stars, had arrived. King, the silent, masked Lunarian, engaged the Akazaya 9. His strange flames and Pteranodon form proving a deadly combination. Queen, the cyborg Brachiosaurus, reveled in the chaos, firing laser beams and plagues indiscriminately. It was a desperate, bloody struggle. The samurai were fighting with the spirit of legends, but they were grievously outmatched. Hiyori, protected by the still loyal members of the Capital Guard who had followed her, was coordinating the evacuation of the prisoners they'd freed in the secured, unconscious form of Orochi. She was a commander now, her voice sharp and clear, directing forces, setting up triage stations. Her Warren life a distant memory. Her eyes kept darting to the sky, to the impossible battle that would decide all their fates. High above, Naruto and Kaido were locked in a brutal, world-breaking exchange. Every punch could shatter a mountain. Every kick boiled the air. It was a flurry of golden light against demonic purple lightning. Naruto was faster, more agile, but Kaido was relentless. His endurance seemingly infinite, his strength monstrous. Naruto landed a solid blow, a sage-infused punch that finally made Kaido grunt in pain, a trickle of blood leaking from the Emperor's mouth. But Kaido answered with a devastating swing of his Kanabo, Ragnarok, a blow so infused with Conqueror's haki that it slammed Naruto into the ground again, the golden chakra cloak flickering violently. He was running out of time. Sage mode had its limits. He couldn't keep this up forever. Kaido, on the other hand, seemed to be enjoying himself, his laughter growing louder with every exchange. Worororo. Yes, this is it. This is the fight I've been waiting for. He bellowed. For the first time, he looked at Naruto with something other than contempt. He saw the fire in his eyes, the absolute refusal to break. It was a look he remembered. Who? What are you? He asked, a genuine curiosity in his voice. No king, no pirate, you fight to protect. A pointless endeavor. In the end, the strong consume all. That's where you're wrong, Naruto panted, pushing himself to his feet. The strong protect, they build, they create a world where the weak don't have to live in fear. That's the will I inherited. The will of a Hokage. He closed his eyes. He reached deep inside himself, to the warm, lingering echo of his oldest friend. He wasn't just Naruto Uzumaki anymore. He was the vessel of countless dreams. The legacy of a hero. The chakra around him exploded, no longer a mere cloak, but a torrent, a tidal wave of golden energy that erupted into the sky. Kaido shielded his eyes. When he looked again, he was no longer facing a man. He was facing a monster. A colossal avatar of pure, golden energy had materialized around Naruto. It was a nine-tailed fox, its form familiar to a world Naruto had left behind. But utterly alien and terrifying to this one. It was larger than the Skull Dome, larger than any giant, its nine tails whipping through the air with enough force to create typhoons. Inside its head, Naruto stood, his arms crossed, his eyes glowing with a divine light. The Kurama Chakra avatar had been unleashed upon the world of One Piece. The fighting below stopped. Everyone, friend and foe, stared up at the impossible, golden god that now dominated the sky. What is that thing? Queen stammered, his cyborg jaw hanging open. Hiyori and the samurai looked on with tears in their eyes. A sense of awe so profound it transcended the fear of the battle. It was a miracle. A sun had just risen in the middle of the night. Kaido stared at the golden fox. His wild, drunken laughter returned. Louder and more manic than ever. Wororo. Yes, wonderful. This is the best. He raised his kanabo, pouring every last ounce of his haki into it, the purple lie. Tning coiling around it like a living serpent. The fox avatar opened its mouth, and a sphere of impossibly dense, swirling energy formed. A mix of positive and negative chakra, a biju bomb, fused with the cutting power of a Rasenshuriken. Let's end this, fox. Kaido roared. Death Destroyer Thunder Bagua. This is for Wano. Naruto yelled back. Sage Art. Tailed Beast Bomb Rasenshuriken. The demonic purple club and the swirling sphere of divine destruction met in the sky above Onigashima. The world went white. The sound vanished, consumed by the sheer magnitude of the energy release. A pillar of pure, apocalyptic power shot into the heavens, so bright and so vast that it was seen from every corner of Wano, a new, temporary sun in the night sky. The top of the Skull Dome was instantly vaporized. The island itself screamed, great chunks of it breaking off and falling into the raging sea below. Far from the chaos, huddled behind a rock that had been sheared in half by the shockwave, the CP0 agent stared, his mask cracked. His professional calm utterly shattered. His Den Mushi, which had been transmitting the feed, crackled with static, the snail's eyes spinning wildly before it fainted. A second, secure snail buzzed at his hip. He answered it, his hand trembling. Report. The cold voice of his superior demanded, the sound laced with an uncharacteristic urgency. What was that light? The agent stared at the column of blinding energy that was now slowly dissipating, revealing a sky wiped clean of clouds and smoke. He couldn't see who was standing. He couldn't see anything but the utter, world-altering devastation. He could only whisper two words, his voice a dry, terrified rasp. Victory. or annihilation. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. A new dawn for Wano. The world returned not with a bang, but with a deafening, ringing silence. The apocalyptic light faded, leaving behind a sky scoured clean of clouds, an unnaturally placid canvas of pale pre-dawn gray. Onigashima was a ruin, a fractured skull bleeding smoke and fire into the sea. The fighting had stopped, not by command, but by a shared, instinctual awe at the sheer scale of the power that had been unleashed. Every eye was turned to the heavens, waiting. From the dissipating golden energy, two figures began to fall. One was Kaido. His hybrid form was gone, the demonic scales and horns dissolving away to reveal the man beneath. He was unconscious, his body limp, plummeting like a stone toward the distant lights of the flower capital. His reign had ended not with a final roar, but with a long, silent fall from grace. The other figure was Naruto. The colossal Kurama avatar shattered into a billion particles of golden light, a beautiful, fleeting aurora in the morning twilight. The chakra cloak around him vanished, and he fell. His body utterly spent. The toll of creating a technique with world-breaking power had drained him to the very marrow of his being. His consciousness winked out before he'd even begun to descend. Naruto. Hiyori's cry was a raw, sharp sound of pure terror. But he didn't fall far. A white and blue streak shot past the crumbling remnants of the fortress roof, moving with impossible speed. Yamato, battered and bruised but burning with adrenaline, leapt into the air, their body shimmering with the form of their divine wolf guardian. They caught Naruto gently in their jaws before he could fall more than a few dozen feet, landing with a ground-shaking thud amidst the stunned samurai. "I've got him," Yamato announced, shifting back to their human form and cradling Naruto's unconscious body in their arms. His head lolled to the side, his face pale and peaceful. He was breathing, but it was the shallow breath of utter exhaustion. "He's just empty." The sight of our fallen hero and the captured enemy leader broke the spell. A cheer, hesitant at first, then growing into a thunderous, cathartic roar, erupted from the samurai. They had won. Against all odds, against a god and his army, they had won. But the battle for Onigashima was not quite over. From the wreckage, two figures staggered to their feet. King, his mask cracked and his black wings tattered, and Queen, his cybernetic parts sparking and his massive form dented and scorched. The All-Stars, the final pillars of Kaido's rule, were still standing. "Insolent fools," King hissed, his voice a cold, metallic rasp. He ignited the flames on his back, his Lunarian heritage granting him a terrifying resilience. "You think because the dragon has fallen, the beast pirates are finished? We will slaughter every last one of you and pile your bodies as a throne for his return." "That's right," Queen bellowed, aiming his cyborg neck like a cannon. "You'll all be corpses for my new, funky music video, The Samurai Massacre." The cheering samurai fell silent, their exhaustion and injuries weighing heavily on them. They had given everything to fight the army. They had nothing left for this. "Rest," a voice commanded. Kinemon, his clothes torn and his body bleeding from a dozen cuts from his fight with King, stepped forward. He was joined by the other Akazaya 9, a wall of battered but unbroken resolve. "We will handle this." "You," Queen laughed, a wheezing, metallic sound. "You're all running on fumes." "He is not alone," Yamato said, gently laying Naruto down beside Hiyori before hefting their kanabo. They stood shoulder to shoulder with the Akazaya, a united front of Wano's past and future. "You served a tyrant who enslaved this country. We serve its freedom. Let's see whose will is stronger." The final battle for Onigashima was short and brutal. King, with his incredible speed and fiery attacks, was a whirlwind of death. But the Akazaya, fighting with the perfect synergy of brothers who had bled together for decades, became a net of steel and will that surrounded him. Ashura Doji's brute strength, Raizo's ninjutsu, Kinemon's flame-cutting swordsmanship, they worked as one, chipping away at the Lunarian's defenses, forcing him to keep his flames ignited and his speed down. It was Yamato who dealt with Queen. The cyborg was a powerhouse of brute force and clumsy technology, but Yamato was a force of nature. Their battle was a demolition derby, smashing through what little remained of the fortress. Queen fired lasers, Yamato countered with blasts of Conqueror's haki. He swung his massive tail. They met it with their club. Finally, seeing an opening, Yamato unleashed a new attack, one born of their admiration for their hero. Ice Wind Rasengan. They roared. It wasn't the real technique, but an imitation born of instinct. They infused their Kanabo with their ice powers and the principles of Haki flow that Naruto had unknowingly taught them, swinging it in a spiraling, devastating arc. The club, wreathed in a vortex of freezing Haki, slammed into Queen's chest, flash freezing his cybernetics and shattering his internal mechanisms. The giant cyborg collapsed, a sputtering, sparking mountain of scrap metal. His defeat was the tipping point. King, now facing the combined might of the Akazaya and Yamato, was overwhelmed. He was driven back, his legendary endurance finally failing. He was defeated not by a single, epic blow, but by a dozen coordinated strikes, a death by 1,000 cuts that symbolized the collective will of the people he had helped oppress. As the sun's first true rays crested the horizon, they illuminated a scene of absolute victory. The beast pirates were broken. Their leaders, defeated. Onigashima, the symbol of their tyranny, was a conquered ruin. 3 days passed. The news of Kaido's fall, confirmed by the sight of his broken body being dragged from a crater in the capital, had spread like wildfire. The remaining beast pirate forces, scattered and leaderless, were quickly routed by the liberated samurai and the prisoners from Udon. A wave of euphoria washed over Wano. The factories were shut down, their smokestacks foul, ling silent for the first time in a generation. The poisoned rivers began, ever so slowly, to run a little clearer. The air tasted sweet. Naruto awoke to the gentle scent of cherry blossoms and the forked touch of a cool cloth on his forehead. He was not in the cavernous ruin of Onigashima, but in a clean, quiet room with sunlight streaming through a paper screen. He sat up, his body aching with a deep, profound exhaustion. But his mind was clear. "You're awake." Hiyori sat by his bedside, a bowl of water in her hands. She wore a simple kimono, the mask of Komurasaki gone forever. Her face was her own, and it was filled with a gentle concern that made Naruto's chest feel warm. "How long was I out?" he asked, his voice raspy. 3 days, she replied, offering him a cup of water. "You gave us all quite a scare. The best doctors in Wano said they'd never seen such a case of complete chakra, or as they call it, spirit, exhaustion." He drank deeply, the cool water a balm to his parched throat. He looked around the room. "Where are we?" "A guest room in the Kazuki Palace," Hiyori said, a small, sad smile on her lips. "It's mostly intact. We've been coordinating the restoration efforts from here. The people, Naruto, you should see them. They're singing in the streets. They're smiling, truly smiling. You brought the dawn." He looked at his hands. They were steady now. He had saved a world once, and it had nearly cost him everything. He had done it again, and he was still here. The weight of his past life, the memories of his family, of Hinata, Boruto, Himawari, they were always with him, a bittersweet ache. But looking at Hiyori, at the hope in her eyes, he felt a new sense of purpose crystallizing. It wasn't about replacing his old life. It was about honoring it by building something new and lasting. "We brought the dawn," he corrected her gently. "I was just the storm that broke the clouds." They sat in a comfortable silence, the unspoken emotions between them a palpable presence. It wasn't romance. It was something deeper. It was the quiet, unbreakable bond of two people who had seen the absolute worst of their worlds and had found in each other a shared will to build something better. It was a bond of mutual respect, of shared trauma, and of a fiercely protected, nascent hope. "The daimyo are gathering today," Hiyori said, her voice becoming more formal, the politician returning. "They want to discuss the future of Wano. Its leadership. They will want to name a new shogun. Your brother, Momonosuke," Naruto stated. "He's the rightful heir." "He is," Hiyori agreed. "But he is still a child in a man's body. He needs time to grow, to learn. And, Wano has changed. I'm not sure the old ways are enough for the new world we're about to enter." She stood, her expression resolute. "There will be a grand assembly in the main courtyard. When you feel strong enough, they will want to see you. The hero of Wano." He watched her leave, the title echoing in his ears. Hero, Hokage. He was so tired of titles. He just wanted to build a home. Later that day, the grand courtyard of the palace was filled to bursting. The 5 daimyo, freed from their prisons or returned from hiding, sat in places of honor. The Akazaya 9, bandaged but standing tall, formed a line of guardians. Ashura Doji and the samurai of Kuri, Kawamatsu and the former prisoners of Udon, the minks led by Inuarashi and Nekomamushi, every faction of the rebellion was represented. And surrounding them were thousands of citizens from the capital and beyond, their faces filled with an expectant, joyful energy. Naruto walked into the courtyard, Yamato at his side. A thunderous cheer erupted, a wave of gratitude so powerful it was almost a physical force. He raised a hand in acknowledgement, a faint, weary smile on his face. When the crowd finally quieted, Hiyori stepped forward onto a raised platform, her presence commanding the attention of the entire nation. "People of Wano," she began, her voice clear and strong, amplified by a Den Mushi. 20 years ago, my father, Kazuki Oden, died to give us a future. For 20 years, that future was stolen from us by the tyranny of Orochi and Kaido. Today, we take it back. Another roar of approval shook the palace. The old laws dictate that with Orochi gone, the shogunate should return to the Kazuki clan, she continued, her voice steady. But I have seen what happens when the fate of an entire nation rests on the shoulders of one person. I saw how the ambition of one man, Orochi, could poison our home, and how the power of another, Kaido, could enslave us. I say, no more. A murmur of confusion rippled through the crowd. This was not what they expected. The world is changing, Hiyori declared, her voice ringing with passion. To keep Wano safe, to help it heal and grow strong, we cannot rely on one leader. We need a government as strong and resilient as its people. Therefore, I propose that the age of the shogun is over. Wano will be led, not by one, but by a council of 3, representing the pillars of our new nation, its spirit, its history, and its protector. She turned first to a stunned Yamato. For our spirit, I name Yamato. They carry the free, indomitable will of my father, Oden. They have the strength to defend our shores and the heart to inspire our people to dream of a greater world. They have broken their chains, and they will help us break ours. Yamato stared, their eyes wide and filling with tears. They, the child of the monster, were being honored. The crowd, after a moment of shocked silence, erupted in a cheer. They had seen Yamato fight. They knew their heart was with Wano. Hiyori then placed a hand on her own chest. For our history, I, Kazuki Hiyori, will take my place. I will represent the legacy of my clan, the culture of our people, and the political wisdom needed to rebuild our home from the inside out. I will ensure the soul of Wano is never lost. The approval was immediate and absolute. She was their princess, their symbol of endurance. Then, she turned and her gaze fell upon Naruto. Every eye in the courtyard followed hers. But a nation needs more than spirit and history to survive in this world, she said, her voice softening but losing none of its power. It needs a shield. It needs a guide. It needs a protector who understands the world beyond our shores. For this role, I name the man who came to us from a storm and brought with him the sun. The one who faced a god and did not bow. Our sage, our hero, Naruto Uzumaki. She was not offering him a title. She was offering him a home, a purpose, a place at the heart of the nation he had saved. Naruto looked out at the sea of faces. He saw the hope, the trust, the sheer, unadulterated faith they were placing in him. He had never sought this. He had never wanted to rule. But he saw the logic in Hiyori's plan. A balance of power, a fusion of the old and the new. He looked at Yamato's tear-streaked, impossibly hopeful face, and at Hiyori's steady, knowing gaze. He was not being asked to be a king who commanded. He was being asked to be a pillar that supported. He stepped forward, and the crowd held its breath. I am not from this land, he said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the square. I don't know your history or all of your customs. But I know what it means to protect your precious people. I know what it means to build a home where everyone can feel safe. He looked at Hiyori, then Yamato. I accept. The cheer that followed was a physical thing, a release of 20 years of pent-up sorrow and a joyous embrace of a future that was, for the first time, truly theirs to build. Naruto, Yamato, and Hiyori stood together on the platform, the 3 new kings of Wano, a sage, an Oni, and a princess. United by a single vow. They would protect this country. They would see it healed. And they would lead it into a new dawn. Thousands of miles away, in a dark, opulent room in the holy land of Marihoa. The 5 elders sat in silence. Before them, projected by a massive Den Mushi, was the live feed from Wano. They had watched it all. On the table between them lay a single piece of paper. It was a new bounty poster, hastily printed. It showed a picture of Naruto, mid-battle, his eyes glowing with sage power. The name was simply, Uzumaki Naruto. The bounty was a number so high it was almost laughable, surpassing even the former emperors. Below the number, in stark red letters, were the words, "Dead or alive. Threat to the world." "So, the dragon has fallen," one of the elders, the tall one with the long white beard, said, his voice a low rumble. "And a fox has taken its place." "This is more than the fall of an emperor," said the elder with the sword, his hand resting on its hilt. Kaido was a beast, but he was a known quantity. He kept Wano closed. This is something else. This Uzumaki has not conquered Wano. He has liberated it. A free Wano, its vast resources and legions of powerful samurai, allied with a man of his caliber, is an unacceptable variable. His power, the bald elder mused, his fingers steepled. It is not a devil fruit. It is not hockey as we know it. It is something ancient, something other. He has shattered the balance, the youngest-looking elder stated, his voice cold. A new king has risen outside of our design. Such things cannot be permitted. The eldest of them, the man with the large mustache, looked at the frozen image of Naruto, Yamato, and Hiyori standing together. Wano holds a secret we have protected for 800 years. We cannot allow it to fall into the hands of a man who follows his own justice. He looked at his comrades, his eyes hard as diamonds. Send word to the fleet. The Buster call was a test. Now, it is time for a purge. And contact the gods' knights. It is time to remind the world why we are its masters. And what of a Musama? The swordsman asked. A deep, chilling silence fell over the room. A Musama, the eldest elder said finally, is already aware. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The World Government's Gaze. A month passed. It was a month of sweat, sawdust, and the sound of hammers ringing under a sky no longer choked with black smoke. Wano was breathing again. The scars remained. The poisoned rivers still ran sluggish and rainbow sheened in the outer provinces, and the land around the old factories was a dead, gray wasteland, but the healing had begun. Naruto stood in a freshly cleared dojo yard in the capital, overseeing the training of a new generation of guards. They were a mix of former rebels, freed prisoners, and even some of the younger, disillusioned samurai who had once served Orochi. They were clumsy, eager, and full of a fierce, protective pride for the nation they were reclaiming. He moved among them, correcting a stance here, demonstrating a block there. He wasn't just teaching them to fight, he was teaching them control, discipline, the understand. That true strength was the power to protect, not to conquer. His movements were economical, his voice calm. He was no longer the hyperactive knucklehead of his youth. He was the 7th Hokage, a teacher and a builder. And he wore the role as comfortably as his old jacket. From a nearby veranda, Hiyori watched him, a tray of tea in her hands. She had traded her elaborate kimonos for the practical, elegant robes of a stateswoman. Her days were a whirlwind of logistics and politics, organizing the massive effort to purify the land, managing the distribution of food from the Kazuki clan's emergency stores, and mediating the disputes between the daimyo who were still adjusting to the new power structure. She was the nation's heart, pumping life back into its withered limbs. Yamato was the nation's muscle. They were currently in Kuri, leading a massive effort to demolish the remnants of the slave mines, working alongside Ashura Doji's men. They swung their kanabo not as a weapon, but as a tool, pulverizing the symbols of their father's tyranny with joyous, unrestrained glee. Their laughter, carried on the wind, was a constant source of morale for the weary workers. The three of the would meet at the palace every evening, sharing a simple meal, their conversations a blend of state affairs, fond reminiscences of the battle, and quiet, shared dreams for the future. An easy camaraderie had formed between them, a seamless partnership built on a foundation of absolute trust. The sage, the Oni, and the princess were not just a council, they were a family, forged in the fires of revolution. This fragile peace was shattered by the arrival of a ship. It was a battered merchant vessel, flying no flag, that limped into the newly reopened port. The captain, a man with the weather-beaten face of a Grand Line veteran, had sought refuge and trade, and he brought with him news from the outside world. He brought newspapers, and he brought the bounty posters. When Naruto saw his, he couldn't help but let out a short, weary laugh. The picture was a dynamic shot, clearly taken during the battle, his eyes glowing in sage mode. The number was astronomical, a string of zeros that made even the most seasoned samurai gasp. But it was the words that drew a chill. Threat to the world. They're not calling you a pirate, Kinemon noted, his voice grim as he looked over Naruto's shoulder. They've branded you an enemy of humanity itself. It was never about piracy, Naruto said, his gaze distant. It's about control. An independent Wano, allied with someone they can't control, that's what they fear. The newspapers were filled with lies, painting the rebellion as a bloody coup orchestrated by a foreign demon who had deposed the rightful Shogun Orochi and defeated the stabilizing force of the Emperor Kaido. They called the new leadership of Wano a rogue state, a threat to global security. The people of Wano, however, were not fooled. They had lived the truth. The posters and papers were not displayed as warnings. They were nailed to the walls of tea houses and homes as badges of honor. The bounty on Naruto's head became a symbol of their victory, a testament to the power that had set them free. Their protector was so mighty that the entire world was afraid of him. A strange, fierce pride swelled through the populace. They had been isolated for so long, but now, they had a place on the world stage. And they would stand defiant. The defiance was tested less than a week later. A lookout from the northern cliffs, one of the minks with their keen eyesight, sent the most dreaded report in the maritime world. Ships, hundreds of them, white sails, the emblem of the world government. They are configured for a buster call. The name fell like a shroud over the war council that Hiyori had convened within the hour. The Akazaya, the daimyo, Yamato, and Naruto gathered around a large map of Wano, the atmosphere thick with tension. A buster call, Kawamatsu the Kappa said, his voice a low growl. An indiscriminate assault designed to wipe an island from the map. They used it on Ohara. This is not a negotiation. It is an execution. Let them come. Yamato slammed a fist on the table, their eyes blazing. We beat Kaido and his entire army. We can beat a few dozen battleships. I'll meet them on the coast and sink them myself. It's not that simple, Hiyori countered. Her voice calm but firm, tracing a line on the map with her finger. A buster call is not a single force. It is 10 battleships, led by 5 vice admirals. It is an overwhelming concentration of firepower. A frontal assault on the open sea would be suicide, even for you, Yamato. Our ships are few, and our samurai are not sailors. Hiyori is right, Naruto said, his eyes closed as he processed the information. He had faced armies, but this was a different kind of war. This isn't a battle of strength. It's a battle of attrition. They can bombard us from miles away. We can't let them get a foothold. And we can't let them surround the island. He opened his eyes, his gaze sharp and focused. But we have an advantage they don't. This is our home. We know its teeth. He pointed to a channel on the northern coast, a treacherous strait known for its unpredictable currents and towering sea cliffs. Here, the Hakumai Strait. It's the fastest route to the capital, but also the most dangerous. Their pride will make them take it. They'll want a swift, decisive show of force. We won't meet them on the open sea. We'll let them come to us. We'll turn this entire strait into a kill box. The plan unfolded, a masterpiece of defensive strategy born from Naruto's tactical mind, Hiyori's intimate knowledge of the land, and Yamato's raw power. The minks, masters of ambush, would line the cliffs, their electro-laced attacks ready to rain down. The samurai archers, equipped with the seastone-tipped arrows from the udon mines, would target the cannons. The main ground force, led by Ashura Doji, would secure the coastline to prevent any landings. And at the mouth of the strait, the heaviest hitters would wait. Yamato, Naruto said, I need you to be the cork in the bottle. When the lead ships enter the strait, you'll use your ice. Block the entrance. Trap them. Sow chaos in their formation. Yamato grinned, a fierce, wolfish expression. A wall of ice for the dogs of the government. I like it. And what of you, Naruto Dono. Kinemon asked. Where will you be? I'll be the hammer, Naruto said, his expression hardening. This fleet will have a commander, a Vice-Admiral with more power and authority than the rest. I'll find him, and I'll cut the head off the snake. Without a leader, the fleet will fall into disarray. He looked around the table at the faces of his allies, his friends. They think we are a rogue state to be erased. Let's show them we are a nation of warriors, ready to defend our home to the last breath. Aboard the flagship, the Justice Unbound, Vice Admiral Kageyama, the puppeteer, stood on the bridge, his white marine coat draped over his shoulders like a cape. He was a tall, unnaturally still man, his face a mask of stern, ascetic discipline. He watched the coastline of Wano grow larger with an expression of cold distaste, as if looking at a tumor that needed to be excised. The natives are preparing a defense, sir, a subordinate reported. Our spotters see movement along the cliffs of the Hakumai Strait. As expected, Kageyama said, his voice flat, without inflection. They are predictable. They will attempt to use the terrain to their advantage. They believe they are fighting a conventional battle. He flexed his fingers, and from his fingertips, 5 impossibly thin, almost invisible strings extended, attaching to the shoulders of the 5 ship captains standing on the bridge. They all stiffened, their movements becoming unnervingly synchronized. They do not understand, Kageyama continued, his voice a cold sermon. This is not a battle. This is a cleansing. Absolute justice is not a dialogue. It is a monologue. We are here to deliver the final word. Proceed into the strait. All ships, full speed ahead. The fleet, a perfect V formation of steel and righteous fury, plunged into the narrow channel. The cliffs rose on either side like jagged teeth, creating an oppressive, claustrophobic atmosphere. Samurai and minks hidden among the rocks held their breath, their hands tight on their weapons, waiting for the signal. From a high watchtower, Hiyori watched the lead ship pass the designated point of no return. She raised a small, red fan. She held it for a beat, a moment of silent prayer for the lives that would be lost. Then, with a sharp, decisive snap, she closed it. The signal was given. The world erupted. From the cliffs, a storm of electro-laced arrows and seastone-tipped artillery rained down. The decks of the marine vessels were thrown into chaos. Cannons exploded, masts splintered. At the mouth of the strait, the sea itself began to churn. Ice Age, Yamato roared, slamming their hands onto the water's surface from a low-lying rock. A colossal wave of ice erupted from the sea, flash freezing the strait's entrance into a jagged, impenetrable glacier. The lead ships, unable to stop their momentum, crashed into it with a sickening crunch of steel, while the ships behind them were thrown into a panicked disarray, ramming into one another in the narrow channel. The trap was sprung, but on the bridge of the Justice Unbound, there was no panic. Vice Admiral Kageyama watched the chaos with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing an ant farm. Their opening gambit is spirited, he noted, but ultimately, futile. He raised his hands, and the invisible strings shot out from his fingertips. Not just to his captains, but across the water, across the decks of every ship in his fleet. On the other ships, wounded marines, men with broken arms and legs, suddenly stood up, their eyes glowing with a faint, eerie blue light. They moved with a jerky, unnatural grace, picking up rifles, aiming cannons, their bodies ignoring the crippling injuries. They had become puppets. An unfeeling army that knew no pain and no fear. But Kageyama's true target was not his own men. His strings, near invisible even to the sharpest eye, shot past the explosions and the chaos, seeking new targets. On the cliffs, a group of samurai let out a battle cry and prepared to leap onto the deck of a nearby ship. Suddenly, they froze. Their bodies went rigid, their eyes glowing with the same blue light. They turned, their own swords raising, and attacked their comrades beside them. Kinemon, leading a charge, saw it happen and his blood ran cold. Treachery. What is this sorcery? From the flagship, Kageyama allowed himself a small, cold smile. His devil fruit, the Ayatsuri no Mi, allowed him to create and control near unbreakable ethereal strings, turning any living thing into his marionette. You fight with passion, with loyalty, he whispered to the distant, chaotic battlefield. Such exploitable weaknesses. I shall make you tear yourselves apart. He extended a single, master string. faster and stronger than the rest. It shot past the lesser combatants, seeking a target of significance. It found one in Ashura Doji, who was single-handedly holding a beachhead against a score of marines. The string wrapped around the massive samurai's arm. Ashura grunted, feeling a sudden, unnatural force tugging at his limb. He fought it, his own haki resisting, but the string was insidiously strong, tightening. Digging into his very soul. High above, observing the entire battle from the air, Naruto saw it all. He saw the marines being turned into puppets. He saw the samurai turning on each other. He saw the single, potent string that had latched onto Ashura. He followed it back with his sage-enhanced senses, past the chaos, past the 9 other battleships, to the flagship at the very center of the fleet. To the man standing on the bridge. The hammer had found its nail. With a burst of speed that left a golden trail in the sky, Naruto shot across the strait. He ignored the cannon fire. The stray bullets, the controlled puppets. His eyes were locked on one man. He was going to end this. Kageyama saw him coming, a golden comet of righteous fury. He showed no surprise, no fear. He simply raised one hand, and with a flick of his fingers, he redirected the string attached to Ashura Doji. The massive samurai, his face a mask of horror at his own betrayal, was forced to swing his giant club. Not at the marines, but up into the sky, directly into Naruto's path. Naruto was forced to halt his charge, appearing in front of Ashura, catching the giant club in his hands. The force of the blow, even from a controlled puppet, was immense. Naruto dono, I can't. Stop my body. Ashura roared in anguish. Naruto looked from Ashura's tortured face to the distant, impassive figure of the vice admiral on the flagship. This was his enemy's power. Not destruction, not overwhelming force. It was a cold, calculated cruelty that turned friends into foes and honor into a weapon. This was not a fight that could be won by simply destroying ships. This was a battle for the very soul of the rebellion. And its puppet master was daring him to cut the strings. In a hidden cove, miles from the fighting, the CP0 agent watched the battle unfold through a high-powered telescope. Subject Kageyama has engaged, he whispered into his Den Mushi. His unique abilities are proving effective at neutralizing the samurai's morale. Uzumaki has been drawn into a direct confrontation. The elders, Gambit is playing out. Now we will see. Can the foxes will break the puppeteer's strings. Chapter 7 end. Chapter 8. The Sage, the Oni, and the Phoenix. The battlefield had become a grand, sadistic puppet show. Vice Admiral Kageyama, from the bridge of his flagship, was the unchallenged master of ceremonies. Naruto found himself trapped in a nightmare of his own making. Every ally he sought to protect was a potential weapon to be turned against him. Ashura Doji, his eyes with horror at his own body's betrayal, swung his massive kanabo with a relentless fury that was not his own. Naruto moved like a phantom, not attacking, but redirecting. He caught the club on his haki-coated forearm, the impact jarring him to the bone, and used the momentum to spin Ashura around, sending him stumbling into a squad of puppet marines. He couldn't use his powerful jutsu. A Rasengan N would kill Ashura as surely as it would any enemy. This was a battle of restraint, a fight that played directly against his fundamental instincts. You see, don't you, Uzumaki Naruto? Kageyama's voice echoed across the strait, amplified by a Den Mushi. It was a cold, passionless sound. Your greatest strength is your bond with these people, and I have made it your greatest weakness. Every Rend is a dagger I can aim at your back. Every life you wish to save is another string for my fingers. Surrender, and I will release them. Resist, and you will be forced to kill them all yourself. On the cliffs, the rebellion was in disarray. Samurai who had fought back to back for 20 years now eyed each other with suspicion. A single touch from an almost invisible string, and a brother in arms became a mindless killer. Morale was plummeting faster than their arrows. Hiyori, watching from her command post, felt a cold dread grip her heart. This wasn't a battle of steel. It was an assault on the very trust that held their army together. Yamato's front was the only one holding firm. Their wall of ice was a fortress, and their sheer, overwhelming power was too chaotic for Kageyama to easily control. They were a raging blizzard, smashing ships and puppets with equal ferocity, but they were pinned at the mouth of the strait, unable to push forward and relieve the pressure on the main force. The rebellion was bleeding, caught on the puppeteer's cruel hooks. Just as Kageyama prepared to tighten his grip, to turn a whole platoon of samurai against Kinemon's command unit, a new sound cut through the chaos. It was a strange, melodic cry, somewhere between a bird's call and a flute's note, and it came from the open sea behind the trapped marine fleet. A ship, elegant and proud, with the head of a great blue bird as its figurehead, sliced through the waves. It was flanked by a handful of other vessels, all flying the same unfamiliar Jolly Roger. Before the Marines could even register the new threat, a figure leapt from the lead ship's deck. He was a man with a pineapple-shaped tuft of blonde hair and a relaxed, almost lazy expression on his face. He was engulfed in a brilliant, consuming aura of blue flame. And with a single flap of great, fiery wings, he took to the sky. It was Marco the Phoenix. He soared over the battlefield, a comet of azure and gold. He wasn't attacking. He was observing, his sharp eyes taking in the entire strategic situation in a single glance. The trapped fleet, the controlled samurai, the struggling rebels. He swooped low over a cliff where a squad of puppets was about to overwhelm a group of minks. He didn't attack them. Instead, he flew through them, his blue flames of resurrection washing over them like a gentle wave. The flames didn't burn. They felt warm, cleansing, and as they passed, the eerie blue glow in the samurai's eyes flickered and died. They collapsed, the puppeteer's strings severed, their bodies their own again. On the bridge of the Justice Unbound, Kageyama's impassive facade finally cracked. His eyes widened a fraction. Marco the Phoenix, 1st Division commander of the late Whitebeard pirates. An unsanctioned, Emperor-class variable. He shifted his focus, 100 strings detaching from the samurai and whipping through the air toward the flying man. Unacceptable. Marco weaved through the strings with an aerial grace that was breathtaking. The ethereal threads passing harmlessly through his intangible, flaming form. The distraction was all Naruto needed. Now, he yelled. With a coordinated burst, 24 of his clones, who had been hiding in reserve, launched a volley of smoke bombs into the heart of the strait. The battlefield was plunged into a thick, vision-obscuring fog. Kageyama's eyes narrowed. He's trying to blind me. But Naruto wasn't trying to blind him. He was trying to get to him. Under the cover of the smoke, he shot forward, a golden blur skimming the waves, his path set directly for the flagship. Marco, seeing his opportunity, landed on the highest cliff, a natural bastion between the Wano forces and the marine fleet. He stood, arms crossed, his blue flames receding to a gentle flicker on his shoulders. "This is as far as you go, Marines." His voice, amplified with haki, boomed across the water. As of this moment, the nation of Wano is under the protection of the Whitebeard pirates. Withdraw now, or face the consequences. A moment later, Naruto landed silently beside him, his six-paths sage mode cloak rippling in the wind. The two men stood side by side, impossible forces meeting at the eye of the storm. "Whitebeard pirates?" Naruto asked, his voice low, his eyes still locked on the distant flagship. "I was told they disbanded. The crew is scattered." "Yoi," Marco said, his gaze calm and appraising as he looked at Naruto. "But the family, and its responsibilities, remain. Odin was our brother. This country was precious to him and to Pops. We won. Let the wolves have it now that the dragon is gone." "I appreciate the help," Naruto said, turning to face the Phoenix. "But Wano doesn't need a new protector. We just got rid of the last one." Marco raised an eyebrow, a hint of a weary smile on his face. "You're the outsider, Uzumaki Naruto. I've read your poster. You have a lot of power, but you don't understand these seas. Pride is a luxury, Yoi. Your newfound freedom won't last a week. You've kicked the world government's nest. I'm offering you an alliance, a banner to stand under that will make them think twice." "An alliance is a partnership between equals," Naruto countered, his gaze unwavering. "What you're offering sounds like a leash, no matter how long you make it. Wano will be an equal to any nation, or it will be nothing at all. It will stand on its own feet." The ideological chasm between them was as wide as the strait itself. Marco, the pragmatist, shaped by the brutal politics of the New World where strength was measured in territory and influence. Naruto, the idealist, who believed that true strength came from the will of a free people. Big words, Marco said, his tone still relaxed, but with an underlying edge of steel. But talk is cheap. That puppeteer down there is tearing your army apart with a parlor trick. The world has bigger monsters than him. If you can't even handle me, how do you expect to handle them? It wasn't a threat, it was a challenge, a test. Before Naruto could answer, Marco attacked. He blurred forward, his leg wreathed in blue flame and coated in armament hockey. Naruto met the kick with his forearm, the impact sending a shockwave through the air. The spar was on. It was a battle of unstoppable force versus an immovable object that could heal. Naruto's attacks were powerful, EAC. Punch carrying the weight of a mountain, but Marco was fluid, intangible. Naruto would land a solid blow that would shatter stone, only for the point of impact on Marco's body to explode into blue flames and instantly regenerate. My flames are the fire of rebirth, Yoi, Marco said, pressing his attack, his kicks powerful and precise. You can't hurt me with simple force. Naruto was forced back, weaving and dodging. Brute strength was useless here. He needed a different approach. He formed a hand sign, and a dozen clones popped into existence around them. But they didn't attack Marco. They leapt off the cliff. Some shot toward the battlefield, pulling samurai out of the line of fire. Others dove into the churning water, fishing out marines who had been knocked overboard from the damaged ships. Marco's eyes widened slightly in surprise. In the middle of their duel, his opponent was actively trying to save the lives of his enemies. Naruto, seeing the briefest of openings, moved. He wasn't aiming for a knockout blow. He was aiming for a disruption. He channeled the nature energy of Sage Mode not into a destructive jutsu, but into the palm of his hand, using the principles of the Gentle Fist he'd learned from Hinata and the Hyuga. It was the Frog Kata, a strike that used the natural world as an extension of the body. He didn't punch Marco. He simply placed his palm against Marco's chest as the phoenix flew past. An invisible, ripple-like pulse of pure nature energy flowed from his hand into Marco's body. For Marco, the sensation was utterly alien. It wasn't an impact. It was a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to momentarily scramble the very essence of his devil fruit power. His flames flickered violently, his regeneration stuttering for a single, crucial heartbeat. He felt disconnected. In that instant of vulnerability, Naruto didn't press the attack. He simply stepped back, his hands held open. Your power comes from your devil fruit. A singular, powerful source, Naruto said, his voice calm. My power comes from everything. The wind, the earth, the life force of this entire world. Wano's strength is the same. It isn't one person. It's the combined will of everyone who calls this place home. That's a power you can't sever with strings, and you can't exhaust with brute force. Marco landed, his regeneration reasserting itself, but he looked at Naruto with a completely new understanding. He saw it now, the clones saving everyone, regardless of their flag. The precise, non-lethal nature of the attack that had disabled him. This wasn't the blind arrogance of a new king. It was a philosophy, a deeply held, powerful belief demonstrated through action. Their moment of understanding was cut short by a roar from the strait below. Kageyama, enraged by air defiance and seeing his control begin to slip, had decided to end it all. If I cannot have them as puppets, then they will be corpses. All ships, target the cliffs, fire at will. The cannons of the remaining battleships, manned by the pain-immune puppets, all turned and aimed at their position. Naruto and Marco looked at the bristling cannons, then at each other. A silent agreement passed between them. An alliance of equals, ready to show them what a partnership looks like. Naruto asked with a grin. Let's give them a show, Yoi, Marco replied, his own wry smile returning. They moved as one. Marco was engulfed in blue fire, launching himself toward the fleet like a living missile, his intangible body a perfect shield against the first volley of cannonballs. Naruto formed a Resenshuriken, but instead of throwing it, he held it, feeding it a massive amount of nature energy, stabilizing its vortex. Now, Naruto yelled. Marco, having absorbed the initial volley, banked hard and flew straight through the spinning sphere of wind chakra. The effect was instantaneous and spectacular. The Resenshuriken's cutting vortex fused with Marco's flames of rebirth. He became a swirling, spiraling typhoon of blue-green energy. A majestic and terrifying combination of their two powers. The Phoenix Rosin Typhoon slammed into the marine fleet. It was not an explosion of fire. It was a cleansing wave. The wind blades shredded the cannons and masts, while the amplified healing flames washed over the decks, not burning the puppet soldiers but severing Kageyama's strings on a mass scale. Thousands of marionettes collapsed as one, their bodies finally their own. On the bridge of the Justice Unbound, Kageyama stared in horror as his control vanished, his connection to his army severed. He saw the Sage and the Phoenix standing together on the cliffs, a symbol of a new, terrifying power. He had come to deliver absolute justice, to excise a tumor. Instead, he had witnessed the birth of a legend. All ships, retreat, he whispered, his voice the dry rasp of defeat. Retreat. The buster call was broken. The surviving ships turned, limping away from the shores of Wano, leaving behind a strait filled with the wreckage of their pride. Marco landed beside Naruto, his flames receding. The battle was won. Wano was, for the second time in as many months, saved. "All right, Yoi," Marco said, looking out at the cheering samurai on the cliffs below. "You want allies, not masters." He turned to Naruto, his expression one of grudging, deep respect. "Show me what kind of ally the nation of Wano intends to be." From his distant, shattered observation post, the CP0 agent lowered his telescope, his hand shaking as he made the report. "Kageyama has failed. The buster call is repelled. Targ, Ed Uzumaki has formed an alliance with Marco, former 1st Division commander of the Whitebeard Pirates. Wano is no longer an isolated, rogue state. It has just announced its presence on the world stage. The Five Elders' Gambit has resulted in the creation of a new emperor." Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Empty Throne's Shadow. The month following the repulsion of the buster call was Wano's first true taste of peace in a generation. The alliance with the remnants of the Whitebeard Pirates, brokered by Marco, acted as a powerful deterrent. Ships bearing their Jolly Roger patrolled Wano's outer waters. A clear signal to the world government and opportunistic pirates alike that this newly opened nation was not to be trifled with. Trade began to trickle in, bringing with it not just goods, but knowledge, news, and the dawning realization of just how isolated Wano had truly been. The real work, however, was internal. It was the quiet, arduous task of healing. Under the Council's guidance, this work took on a focused, almost sacred quality. One of the most significant projects was the careful study of Wano's history, a history that had been suppressed and rewritten by Orochi. This led Naruto, Yamato, and Hiyori, along with Momonosuke and Marco, to the most secret place in all of Wano, a chamber deep in the bedrock beneath the Kazuki Palace, a place even Orochi had never found. The air was cool and still, smelling of ancient stone and forgotten time, and in the center of the chamber, illuminated by a single shaft of light from above, stood the road poneglyph. It was a colossal cube of crimson stone, its surface covered in a language no one present but Momonosuke could hear in his soul. Hiyori ran her hand over its surface, a look of profound reverence on her face. "For generations, my family protected this," she said softly. "My father believed it was the key to the true history of the world, to the secrets of the Void Century. The Kazuki clan carved these stones, using a technique now lost to time, to ensure the truth could never be erased. So the world government didn't just lie about Wano's history," Naruto mused, staring at the indecipherable script. "They lied about the world's. They fear the dawn." "Yoi," Marco added, his arms crossed. "Pops always said that the man Odin was waiting for, the one who would find Roger's treasure, would be the one to turn the world upside down. These stones are the map." Yamato, who had been staring at the poneglyph with wide, reverent eyes as if it were a page from Odin's journal, suddenly stiffened. "Do you feel that?" Naruto's head snapped up. His sage mode wasn't active, but his senses, now permanently honed by the natural energy of this world, screamed a warning. It wasn't a physical presence he felt. It was a distortion, a wrongness. The air in the chamber grew heavy, the light from above seeming to dim as if being consumed by a nascent black hole. In the center of the room, a patch of shadow on the floor began to churn. It was not a shadow cast by anything, but a patch of pure, unnatural darkness that twisted and coalesced. From it, a perfect, five-pointed geometric shape, like a demonic star, etched its LF onto the ancient stone in lines of purple, glowing energy. What is that? Kanamon, who stood guard at the door, drew his sword, his face pale. The air crackled. The temperature plummeted. A figure. E began to rise from the center of the sigil, not with the speed of a summons, but with the slow, inexorable dread of a nightmare taking form. It was an old man, dressed in a simple black suit and a white GI, with a bald head. A massive mustache, and spectacles perched on his nose. He had a distinctive, spider-like mark on his forehead. He was one of the 5 elders. Saint J. Garcia Saturn. And he was not alone. From the points of the star, 2 other figures rose, silent and emotionless. They were children, a boy and a girl, with the telltale silver hair and brown skin of the Lunarian race. E-boy carried a massive sword identical to Mahawk's, and the girl's eyes held a cold, serpentine emptiness. They were seraphim. The pressure they exuded was absolute. It was a suffocating, divine authority. A presence that screamed you are lesser beings. Momonosuke collapsed to his knees, clutching his head, overwhelmed. The blood of the traitors, still befouling this sacred place. Saturn's voice was not loud. But it filled the chamber, each word dripping with an ancient, weary contempt. He looked at the poneglyph, not with curiosity, but with the irritation of a man looking at a piece of graffiti that should have been scrubbed away centuries ago. The arrogance of the Kazuki clan, to think they could etch their lies in stone and have them last forever. Naruto and Marco moved instantly, placing themselves in front of Hiyori and Momonosuke. Yamato stood beside them, their kanabo held in a white-knuckled grip, their usual boisterous energy replaced by a cold, deadly focus. "Who are you?" Naruto demanded, his chakra flaring to life, the golden cloak of his sage mode enveloping him. Saturn's gaze shifted to him. There was no surprise, no fear. Only a cold, analytical curiosity. So this is the anomaly. The shadow that does not belong. Uzumaki Naruto, you have caused a great deal of trouble, disrupting a balance that has been carefully maintained for 800 years. Your balance is a boot on the neck of the world, Naruto retorted. Saturn almost smiled. Order requires sacrifice. Peace requires control. 800 years ago, the world nearly tore itself apart, consumed by a foolish, chaotic ideal. By a god of liberation who promised nothing but anarchy. We brought order. We created a peace that has lasted for centuries. A peace you now threaten. He gestured to the poneglyph. This stone speaks of a prophecy. Of a sun god, who will return to bring the dawn. A childish fantasy, but it also speaks of a lesser, forgotten legend. Of a shadow sage, a force from beyond the pale. Whose arrival would be the final omen, a catalyst for the great, final war. His eyes, ancient and cold, bored into Naruto. You, child of another world, are that shadow. Marco's flames flared to life. Enough talk. Yoi, you're one of the Gorosei. Your presence here is an act of war. He shot forward, transforming into his phoenix form, a blur of blue flame aimed at Saturn's head. He never made it. The S-Hawk Seraphim moved. It was not speed. It was instantaneous. One moment it was by the sigil, the next it was in front of Marco, its massive black blade already swinging. The clash was deafening. Marco was blown back, his flames struggling to reform, a thin, clean cut across his chest. A wound from a seraphim that was, impossibly, not healing instantly. Simultaneously, the S-Snake moved on Yamato. It moved with a liquid grace, firing a beam of pink, heart-shaped energy from its fingers. Yamato, roaring, met it with their kanabo. Reime Hake. The blast of Conqueror's haki dissipated the beam. But the seraphim was already on them, its movements a perfect copy of the Kuja's fighting style, fluid and deadly. The two battles erupted, a chaotic whirlwind of blue flames, black steel, icy blasts, and serpentine grace. The seraphim were holding their own. They were holding off 2 Emperor-level combatants. Naruto ignored them. His target was the source. He shot forward, a Rasengan forming in his hand, aiming directly for Saturn. He might as well have been trying to punch the ocean. Saturn didn't move. He didn't raise a hand. He simply looked at Naruto. A crushing, invisible force slammed into Naruto from all directions. It wasn't haki. It was something else. A pure, conceptual pressure. Naruto's Rasengan imploded, his sage mode cloak flickering violently. He felt as if every cell in his body was being individually squeezed. His bones groaned, his lungs burned. He was forced to his knees, the stone floor cracking beneath him. "Your power is fascinating," Saturn said, his tone that of a researcher dissecting an insect. "This, chakra, it is the energy of life itself, weaponized. But it is still just that, energy, and all energy can be dominated." He took a slow step forward. Hiyori, her face a mask of defiant terror, drew her small blade and stood over her brother, a final, hopeless line of defense. Saturn gave her a dismissive glance. "You have Odin's fire, girl. A pity it will be extinguished so pointlessly." With a roar of pure, unadulterated rage, Naruto forced himself back to his feet. The pressure intensified, but he fought against it, his muscles screaming. His veins bulging, the golden cloak around him solidified, deepened, and 9 black truth-seeking orbs materialized behind him. The 6 paths sage mode. "I will not let you touch them," he gritted out. Saturn's eyebrows rose a fraction. The pressure on Naruto lessened as the ancient being was forced to acknowledge the new level of power. "Remarkable. You are not just a shadow. You are a paradox, a being of absolute will, untethered to the laws of this world." He raised a single, bony finger. "A paradox that must be erased." The invisible force concentrated on Saturn's fingertip. Naruto felt an absolute certainty of death, a focused intent so pure and powerful it dwarfed even Kaido's killing intent. This was not a physical attack. This was an attack on his very existence. He acted on pure instinct. He shaped one of his truth-seeking orbs into a shield, a perfect defense that could nullify any ninjutsu. But this wasn't ninjutsu. The attack hit. The black shield didn't shatter. It warped. It bent. It dissolved, the conceptual power of the orbs being unwoven by Saturn's attack. The force slammed into Naruto, blowing him back across the chamber. He crashed head into the far wall with enough force to splinter the poneglyph's chamber. He slid to the floor, the 6 paths cloak gone, blood trickling from his mouth. He was alive, but the blow had shaken him to his core. "It is over," Saturn said, turning his attention back to Hiyori. But it wasn't. Naruto pushed himself up again, his body trembling, his vision swimming. He was out of options. His physical attacks were useless. His ninjutsu was being nullified. His most powerful defense had been erased. But he had one last card to play. A power that was not of strength, but of essence. He shaped his saint remaining truth-seeking orb into a long, black rod. He poured every last ounce of his remaining sage chakra into it, along with the will of a Hokage, the unyielding desire to protect. He didn't charge. He didn't yell. He threw it. The rod spun through the air, not with incredible speed, but with an eerie, unnatural silence. Saturn, seeing it, deemed it another futile effort and simply raised his hand to swat it from the air. The rod, however, phased through his hand. Because it was not just a physical object. It was a manifestation of yin-yang release, a power that could breathe life into form and give form to nothingness. It was a power that touched not the body, but the soul. The tip of the rod grazed Saturn's cheek as it flew past. For the first time in what might have been centuries, one of the 5 elders felt pain. It was not a deep wound. It was a thin, black line, a cut that sizzled with an energy that was anathema to his own. It wouldn't heal. His divine, untouchable body had been wounded by a mortal. Saturn froze. His hand went to his cheek, his fingers touching the wound, his mind reeling with a shock so profound it was almost existential. He stared at Naruto, at the bloody, defiant man who was struggling to stand, and he saw not a paradox but an impossibility. His mission was to assess and, if necessary, eliminate the threat. But he had been harmed. The risk of engaging this thing further, of revealing more of his own power, was now too great. The information he had gathered was more valuable than a single, Pyrrhic victory. "You have sealed your fate, Uzumaki Naruto." Saturn's voice was no longer calm. It was laced with a cold, terrifying fury. "The shadow of the empty throne has seen you. And it will not forget." The demonic sigil on the floor flared. The seraphim, disengaging from their stalemated battles with Marco and Yamato in a blur of motion, returned to their places. Saturn gave one last, venomous glare, and the three of them descended back into the churning darkness. The sigil faded. The pressure vanished. They were gone. Silence descended upon the broken chamber. Marco and Yamato rushed to Naruto's side, helping him to his feet. Hiyori was on the floor, holding her still shaking brother. Kinemon stared at the spot where the beings had vanished, his face the color of ash. They had survived, but they had not won. They had just met a god of their world, and he had promised their annihilation. The war for Wano was over. A much larger, more terrifying war, a war against the heavens themselves, had just begun. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. The Unyielding Kingdom. The silence in the poneglyph chamber was heavier than the stone that surrounded them. It was a silence filled with the ghost of a pressure that still seemed to squeeze the air. The echo of a presence that had rewritten their understanding of the world. The thin, sizzling black line on the floor where Saturn's blood had dripped was a stark, physical reminder of the impossible encounter. It did not evaporate. It did not dry. It simply was, a scar on reality itself. Naruto leaned heavily on Yamato's shoulder, his body a screaming chorus of aches. The brief, brutal, confrontation had taken a greater toll than the entirety of his fight with Kaido. That had been a battle of power. This was a battle of concepts, of wills, and he had come terrifyingly close to being erased. What was that? Momonosuke stammered, his voice trembling as Hiyori helped him to his feet. That pressure, it was like the whole world was telling me I didn't have the right to exist. That was one of the 5 elders. Marco said, his voice grim. He was staring at the shallow cut on his chest, which was stubbornly refusing to heal, the blue flames of his regeneration flickering uselessly around its edges. The highest authority in the world government. The secret kings of the world. They are not supposed to leave Marihoa. For one to come here, in person, he trailed off, the implication hanging in the air. He didn't come here for the poneglyph, Naruto said, his voice a low rasp. He pushed himself upright, refusing to show the true extent of his exhaustion. His gaze was fixed on the spot where Saturn had vanished. He came for me. He called me a shadow, a catalyst. He knew I wasn't from this world. The prophecy he mentioned, Hiyori mused, her mind racing, the scholar and the politician overriding the terrified princess. A sun god and a shadow sage. It's not in any of the Kozuki histories of Red. It must be a part of the history the world government erased. It doesn't matter what they call us, Yamato declared, slamming their kanabo on the floor, the sound a defiant crack in the oppressive silence. He came to our home, he threatened our family, and he hurt our friend. We will be ready for him when he returns. Their words, simple and full of fierce, unwavering loyalty, were the spark that broke the spell of fear. The dazed looks on the faces of Kinemon and the others hardened into a familiar, stubborn resolve. They had faced a god once before in the form of a dragon. This new one was different, more insidious, but the principle was the same. Wano did not kneel. Their new council of kings convened not in a grand hall, but right there, in the dust and debris of the violated chamber, a war council for a war that had not yet been declared. He came here through some kind of summoning jutsu, Naruto reasoned, piecing it together. It was powerful, but it felt specific. Like it could only be used in certain places, or at certain times. He won't be able to just pop in for a visit whenever he wants. We have time. We need to use it. Time for what? Ashura Doji asked, having arrived with reinforcements after feeling the terrifying presence from above. How do we fight a monster who can turn our own men against us and appear from the shadows? We don't fight him on his terms, Naruto said, a familiar, determined glint returning to his eyes. We fight him on ours. He represents order and control. So we will represent freedom and chaos. His power is to dominate the will of others. So we will build a nation of people with wills so strong they can't be broken. The idea began to take shape, a grand strategy born from the ashes of their terror. It was a plan that was uniquely, quintessentially Naruto. It was not about buoy. LDING bigger walls or forging stronger weapons. It was about empowering the people. Over the next few months, Wano underwent a transformation that was even more profound than the expulsion of Kaido. His focus shifted from simple reconstruction to active preparation. Naruto, drawing on his lifetime of experience as a shinobi and a established a new national guard, but it was unlike any army Wano had ever seen. He began the painstaking process of teaching the fundamentals of chakra control to those who showed an aptitude for it. It was a slow, difficult process. The people of this world had no concept of chakra networks, of the spiritual and physical energies he spoke of. But they were samurai. They understood ki, the flow of energy, the power of the will. And under his guidance, a few, then a few dozen. Then hundreds of them began to grasp the basics. They learned to walk on water and trees, incredible feats that boosted morale to the heavens. They learned to channel their haki not just as a blunt instrument of will, but with the pinpoint precision of a shinobi, infusing it into kunai and shuriken. Wano was not just rebuilding an army of swordsmen, it was creating a legion of shinobi. Yamato, inspired by Naruto's methods, took charge of the physical and haki training. They were a relentless, joyous taskmaster, pushing the new recruits to their absolute limits. They trained them to fight in Wano's treacherous terrain, to use the cliffs and forests as weapons, to be as indomitable and resilient as the mountains themselves. Their boisterous energy was infectious, forging a spirit of unbreakable camaraderie. Hiyori, meanwhile, wielded her own unique weapons, politics and information. With Marco's help, she established new, secure trade routes, bringing in not just resources but allies. The remnants of the Whitebeard pirates became Wano's de facto navy. She used her network of informants, the one she had cultivated as Komurasaki, to spread the truth about the world government beyond Wano's borders. Countering their propaganda with first-hand accounts of their tyranny, she sent carefully chosen emissaries to places like Zou and Fishman Island, nations that had suffered at the hands of the world government, forging quiet alliances, building a coalition of the free. Wano was no longer an isolated island, it was becoming the heart of a global, underground resistance. The three of them worked in perfect harmony. Naruto built the foundation, Yamato forged the steel, and Hiyori guided the hand that would wield the sword. They were a government of action, their leadership visible and tangible. They trained with their soldiers, ate with the workers, and listened to the concerns of the people in the towns. The bond between the rulers and the ruled became absolute. They were not just preparing for an invasion. They were building their answer to Saturn's philosophy. He believed in peace through absolute control. They would create a peace built on absolute, unshakable trust in the collective will of a free people. The day came, 6 months after Saturn's appearance. The sky above Wano did not darken with storm clouds, but with sails. A fleet larger than any ever assembled, larger than the Buster Call, a grand armada of world government steel, appeared on the horizon. At its head was not a vice admiral's ship, but a vessel of black and crimson, flying the flag of the commander-in-chief. And flanking it were the ships of the gods' knights, the celestial dragon's elite guard. This was not a Buster Call. This was an eradication. But Wano was ready. The shores were not lined with a panicked, desperate army. They were lined with a nation. Every citizen who could hold a weapon stood ready. And on the highest cliff overlooking the Hakumai Strait, Naruto, Yamato, and Hiyori stood together, the sea wind whipping at their clothes. Naruto had a new coat, a blend of his old Hokage jacket and Wano's traditional fashion, the back bearing not the symbol of fire, but the crest of the Kazuki clan intertwined with the swirl of the Uzumaki. Yamato's horns seemed to gleam in the sun, their expression one of fierce, joyful defiance. Hiyori had her blade at her side, her face serene and resolute, the princess turned stateswoman ready for her final battle. "They've come to erase a shadow," Naruto said, his voice calm, carrying over the wind. "But they're too late. We're not a shadow anymore," Yamato grinned, hefting Takaru onto their shoulder. "We are a dawn they can't undo," Hiyori finished, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. Below them, the minks stood ready on the cliffs, sparks of electro dancing on their fur. The shinobi forces, hidden in the trees, prepared their paper bombs and smoke screens. Marco and the Whitebeard fleet engaged the vanguard on the open sea. A brilliant display of blue fire and cannonades. As the lead ship of the gods' knights entered the strait, Naruto raised his hand. This was the signal, but it wasn't an attack order. Across the cliffs of Wano, 1,000 voices rose as one. It was a roar of pure, focused, unified will. The new shinobi of Wano, the samurai, the minks, the former prisoners, all focused their haki, their spirit, their chakra, into a single, invisible wave. It wasn't an attack, it was a statement, a wall of pure, unadulterated defiance. A collective will so powerful that the VRYC churned and the sky seemed to ripple. Aboard the enemy flagship, the commanders felt it. It wasn't the conqueror's haki of a single individual. It was the unified will of an entire nation. It was the spirit of a people who had tasted freedom and would die to the last soul before surrendering it. It was a force that could not be puppeted, could not be intimidated, and could not be broken. Naruto, Yamato, and Hiyori leapt from the cliff, landing on the shores below, ready to lead the charge. The battle for Wano had begun. But the war for the dawn of the world was already won. They had buoyed a kingdom that was more than just land and castles. They had built an idea. They had built an unyielding, unbreakable home. And they would face the wrath of the heavens not as kings, but as family, standing together against the storm. The final scene is not one of victory in battle, but of the unshakable certainty of their path. They stand together, the sage, the Oni, and the princess, a perfect trinity of power, spirit, and wisdom. Behind them, a nation roars its defiance. Before them, the might of the world prepares to crash against their shores. And they meet it with a shared, confident smile, ready for the future they had forged, together. Chapter 10 End.